Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
Brian Tully, T-U-L-L-Y,
And how are you employed, sir?
with the Massachusetts State Police.
And how long have you been a member of the state police?
18 years.
And what rank or assignment do you currently have with the Mass State Police?
The rank I hold is Detective Lieutenant, and my current role is the Unit Commander for the Norfolk State Police Detective Unit.
And now, how long have you been, let me ask you first, as far as how long have you been lieutenant with the state police?
I was a first lieutenant in 2021, and then I attained the rank of Detective Lieutenant later in 2021.
And with reference to your current unit, how long have you been a member of that?
I've been with the Norfolk State Police Detective Unit for 12 years.
And prior to and throughout the course of your work within the detective unit, the Norfolk DA's office for the state police, what, if any, specialized training have you received and or given in regard to investigations and how they're conducted?
For the first 10 years as the rank of trooper and sergeant, I was on the homicide section of the unit. When first entering the unit, I received instruction on how to conduct homicide and death investigations. In addition to that, I attended over 200 hours of specialized training in the use of cell phones and cell phone technology in the furtherance of criminal investigations. Further on, I have now been an instructor about cell phones and cell phone technology in criminal investigations. I've taught death investigation classes around the Commonwealth, and as well as search and seizure law in Massachusetts.
Now, if I could ask you just with respect to your unit, if you could explain to the jury sort of what is the role and what does your unit do with respect to death investigations within Norfolk County?
So each district attorney's office has a state police detective unit assigned to it. So Mass General Law, Section 38, Section 4 says that the district attorney is in charge of all death investigations. So if someone passes away, essentially not in the presence of a doctor or the circumstances that led to their death was outside the presence of medical care, the district attorney is in charge of the investigation, or their representative. And so each DA has a state police detective unit assigned to them to act as their representative. In certain jurisdictions like Boston, Worcester, and Springfield, the DAs in those counties have said that those local departments can be their representatives, but throughout the Commonwealth, the state police is the DA's representative in those death investigations.
Now, as far as assignments go, or as far as how is it that, well, as far as how an investigation is run, how is it that a call comes in? If you could take the jury through sort of from the time that a call comes in, how that investigation is.
I'll talk in a typical state. Oftentimes, someone passes away, again, not in the presence of a doctor, gets found by somebody, a loved one, a friend, a passerby. They call 911, which gets routed to the local police, who respond and come to learn that someone has passed away in the circumstance. That police department will then call the troop headquarters on the state police. The state police is cut up in different troops by geographic location. Each troop duty lieutenant would have a list of who the on-call person is for the state police detective unit of jurisdiction. They would then call that trooper or sergeant directly to inform them that there's a death in a certain community and give them a telephone number to contact somebody who's directly on scene to get more information.
Now, as far as your role as sort of the supervisor or the lieutenant in charge of the unit, can you describe to the jury sort of what your role is in regard to those investigations?
So within the detective unit, we have the homicide section, a narcotics section does narcotics investigations, and a special investigation section. So specific to the homicide section, there are certain levels of supervision. We have a sergeant assigned to the homicide section. I have an executive officer who's a lieutenant, and then me. So multiple levels of supervision specific to any of the sections, including the homicide section.
Now, turning your attention to January 29th, 2022, at some point did you become aware in the morning with regard to a death within the town of Canton?
Yes.
And what, if any, when did you become aware and how did you become aware initially of what had transpired?
Shortly after 7 a.m. that date, I received a call from Sergeant Yuri Buchanan informing me that a person by the name of John O'Keefe was found unresponsive in Canton. He was transported to Good Samaritan Hospital, where it was expected he was not to survive. Normally, I would not get a call like that, but the we learned that Mr. O'Keefe was an active Boston police officer. Sergeant Buchanan wanted to make me aware of it at that point.
And so then what happened from there as far as your unit's involved?
So as we learned more information about what was found on scene by the Canton Police Department, Trooper Proctor, who was the on-call the on-call trooper that day on the schedule, and Sergeant Buchanan responded to Canton Police to begin the investigation. And they would keep me updated as they learned more information.
Now, as far as your unit is concerned, what, if any, role does your unit have, or what, if any, jurisdiction does your unit have with relation to any kind of death, whether it be homicide, suicide, unattended death, within the confines of Norfolk County?
We have exclusive jurisdiction by law, but the law also suggests that we need to work with the local police departments as well.
And so how is it that typically in a typical investigation that your unit would work in conjunction with the local police departments in relation to a death investigation?
Their detective unit would be involved if they have one, and some departments in Norfolk County don't. They would stand by to wait for our arrival. There'd be constant communication between the responding trooper and the detective on scene about things that need to be done prior to our arrival, but essentially ask for or wait for our guidance on what to do next.
And as far as certain investigations go, are there decisions sometimes that are made with regard to your involvement or maybe your unit not being involved in a death investigation?
Yes.
And how are those determinations made, and who makes those determinations?
It falls to either the person who's on call or their supervisor. We don't respond to all of those calls. So a police officer may call and say that a woman in her 80s has passed away in bed overnight. Her primary care doctor has said that she's struggled with cancer or treatment, and that doctor is willing to sign a death certificate. In those circumstances, it's not suspicious, it's not a suicide or a fatal opiate overdose. We would not respond in that case. That would be one that we would decline. In other circumstances, we may get the call and then learn that the person's going to survive, and so we will not respond. We typically will mirror what the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. If they're involved, then we'll definitely be involved.
Now, turning to that point, as far as the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner is concerned, in any sort of death investigation that your unit is involved in, what, if any, involvement or communication do troopers from your unit or yourself have with the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner?
We have constant communication. The law that I cited also says that the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner has exclusive jurisdiction as well to determine the cause and manner of death. So we work closely hand in hand to figure out the circumstances that led to the death.
Now, as far as working close hand in hand with the medical examiner's office, what does that sort of typically entail?
Takes a turn of phone calls. We'll call in and speak to the intake person or the on-call doctor to tell them what we've learned or what we're observing. We forward reports in every case to the doctors, so they understanding at least what we learned in the first 24 hours. Doctors will often reach back out to us asking for scene photographs, more reports, ask questions. And in instances where it's a suspicious death, we will send an investigator to the autopsy to stand with the doctor to make observations and answer any questions for the doctor.
Now, as far as the determinations that are ultimately come to by the medical examiner, Lieutenant, as far as any determinations that are made with reference to either cause or manner in any instance with the medical examiner, what, if any, role do you or anyone from your unit have with regard to that decision by the medical examiner?
We have little to no role outside of providing information.
And as far as the determination specifically, whether it's manner or cause, what, if any, impact does that have with regard to any death investigation that you're doing?
Well, the cause will give us a big incident. So we want to know if the person died of a heart attack or if they died of a gunshot wound. That's big when it comes to then making charging decisions about circumstances. So it's important to learn the cause, and to get the doctor's input on the manner is also helpful.
But as far as the manner, if the manner is found to be undetermined, would that impact what you've learned through the rest of the course of your investigation as far as charging goes?
No, that determination by the OCME is often in the early stages of investigation, and as we learn more information, the circumstances can change.
And the determination that is made by the medical examiner, that's strictly from a medical perspective, correct?
Correct.
Now, with regard to January 29th, 2022, and this call that is initially received, Trooper Proctor and Sergeant Mechanic then essentially respond to the Canton Police Department first, is that correct?
Yes.
And as far as your role as it pertains to this or any other investigation, how much involvement do you have, or how are you sort of apprised of what's going on?
Sergeant Mechanic, in this case, and in typical cases, he's keeping me updated by telephone, so I can supervise from anywhere with my cell phone. He's giving me updates about what he's learning. We'll discuss what the next steps should be. And that's what transpired over the morning of January 29th.
Now, over the course of the morning of January 29th, what, if any, conversations did you have with relation to the Canton Police Department's involvement or ongoing or further involvement with regard to this investigation?
I had spoken with the acting chief at the time, the current chief, the chief at the time, Kenneth Berkowitz, about the involvement in the Canton Police Department. We talked about the homeowner at 34 Fairview and his relationship to his department. And because of the appearance of a conflict, we had made a decision that the Canton Police was going to take a step back from the investigation and that the state police would do the investigation without them.
Now, as far as that appearance of a conflict or step back, as you termed it, what was your understanding at that time as far as what the role of the Canton Police would be?
Really to provide support. So anytime we're in a local community, we need the support of the local police. If we're going to start knocking on doors, we want to make sure they're aware or present. They have resources in town, whether it be lights or barriers that we may need to access. So I would define it as a support role.
Now, with respect to those conversations you mentioned that you had yourself and what the then current chief, Kenneth Berkowitz, who, if anyone else, was involved in those conversations?
The district attorney.
That would be Mr. Morrissey, is that correct?
Yes.
Is that abnormal for him to be involved in conversations in regard to a police department and any sort of appearance of conflict?
No, it's not abnormal for him to be involved.
And as far as his involvement in his conversations, as far as you're aware, did they evolve, or were they any greater or less than the conversations that you had with Chief Berkowitz?
No, they were the same conversations.
Let me ask you this, Lieutenant. At some point over the course of this case, or at some point over the course of this investigation, did you become aware of certain text messages on Trooper Proctor's personal phone?
Yes.
And upon your being made aware of those text communications, what, if anything, did you as a supervisor, what, if anything, did you do?
I had a long discussion with him about the content and nature of them. I expressed my displeasure as unprofessionalism and the content of them, and then I reported up my chain of command.
Was he admonished in any way?
He was by me at that conversation, yes.
Now, sir, again, just sort of in general terms, you're familiar with this investigation as you're supervising the unit that was investigating it, correct?
Yes.
Now, is it typical practice in conducting homicide or death investigations as far as civilian witnesses are concerned to seize their personal cell phone?
It's not uncut, it happens. Yes.
And is that a practice that occurs with respect to every single witness in every single case?
No.
And so what are sort of the parameters, or what would be some of the reasons that certain civilian witnesses' cell phones would be seized versus others?
Well, you use the word seize, so when I think of the word seize, I'm thinking in the legal context where I think there's probable cause to believe, more likely than not, there's evidence of the crime I'm investigating held within the data of that phone. Sometimes, if we believe there's information on the phone, we may ask for consent for that one specific thing or for that one specific reason. But outside of that, unless I have that belief there's data on a phone, I won't ask for consent or seize a phone and pursue a search warrant.
Now, are you aware of certain cell phones that were either seized or granted access via consent in relation to this investigation?
Yes.
And specifically, Mr. O'Keefe's phone was taken into custody, correct?
Yes.
And the defendant's phone was taken into custody on January 29th as well?
Yes.
Now, as far as civilians, there were two civilian witnesses whose phones were given via consent and then extracted, that being a Jennifer McCabe and a Kerry Roberts, correct?
Yes.
And so why was it that Ms. McCabe's phone and Ms. Roberts' phone was taken versus some other witness in the case?
Well, they had information relative to the actions of Ms. Reed and the communications with specifically those two individuals on the morning of the 29th. So we wanted to memorialize them and save them.
Now, sir, with respect to your involvement on January 29th, where and when did you sort of leave and become involved in the investigation beyond sort of a supervisor?
Shortly after noontime, we had learned more information that necessitated a broader search. So I had reached out to Lieutenant Kevin O'Hara with the State Police SERT team to assist with processing of a scene. And so since we were going to be processing a scene, it was prudent for me to leave my house, dig out, and drive to Canton.
And sir, with respect to, you mentioned dig out from your house. What were the conditions like around the time that you were leaving?
There's probably 8 to 10 inches at the house, so I had to dig out my driveway and the large snowbank at the end of the driveway that's caused by the plow in order to get a vehicle out and head to Canton.
And where is it first that you were heading to?
I first went to the Canton Police Department to talk to Chief Berkowitz and wait for the arrival of the SERT team, and then to 34 Fairview.
And as far as the SERT team was concerned, if you can, explain to the jury sort of the process from your perspective, from your end, as far as activating the SERT team, what it is that they do and why you had requested.
We work with Lieutenant O'Hara frequently. I called him on a cell phone, and the SERT team is out of a different chain of command. So the State Police is a very paramilitary organization with specific chains of commands with different structures. So I reached out to him and asked for his assistance with this investigation. He had to get further approval up his chain of command, mostly for overtime and to pay the troopers to come out. That would be the way that I would make a formal request to the SERT team.
And so the initial phone call that you made to Lieutenant O'Hara, you don't have the power or the authority to sort of direct him to dispatch his team and go to 34 Fairview, correct?
Correct.
And so as far as that initial phone call that you made to Lieutenant O'Hara, do you know about what time of the day that was?
It was about 2 in the afternoon.
And what was the purpose of sort of that initial phone call that you made to Lieutenant O'Hara?
To give him a heads up, because it needs to be a conversation up my chain of command. So above me, there's a detective captain and a major. My major needs to really talk to his major to make the formal request. But I wanted Lieutenant O'Hara to be aware of the request was coming so that he could at least start polling his people to see who was available to respond to Canton.
And with respect to the weather, if you could just in general terms describe for the jury sort of what you observed as far as the weather conditions on that day.
I observed blizzard-like conditions. It was snowing heavily, windy, low visibility.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
So I'm showing you a series of documents. Just ask if you could look at those, look up when finished. And do you recognize those, sir?
I do.
And what do you recognize those to be?
They are certified records from the U.S. Department of Commerce out of Asheville, North Carolina, for weather reports from Norwood Memorial Airport, Massachusetts, for the dates of January 2022 and February 2022.
So for the entirety of the months of January 2022 as well as February 2022, correct?
Yes.
And are you familiar with the Norwood Municipal Airport and where it is in relation to the town of Canton?
Yes.
Where is it?
It's the next town over.
And as far as, are you familiar with a Neponset Street in Norwood?
I am.
And does Neponset Street also carry into the town of Canton as well?
Yes.
And with regard to 34 Fairview Road, about how far away is 34 Fairview from Neponset Street?
From the Ponza Street, it's a mile, 2 miles.
So relatively same geographic area as far as the Norwood Municipal Airport and 34 Fairview Road.
Yeah, I would say as the crow flies from 34 Fairview to Norwood Municipal Airport, that's probably 3 miles.
And sir, with regard to the records before you, from your memory of those dates and those times in January and February of 2022, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what the weather was like, temperature-wise as well as precipitation?
Yes.
I love that question.
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Tom off the stage and introduce in minutes.
Now do you understand me?
And so, Lieutenant, at some point, you respond to 34 Fairview Road, is that correct?
Yes,
And do you recall about what time it was that you arrived there?
about 5:30 p.m.
And when you arrived there, who, if anyone else, from the state police preceded your arrival?
There was at least 2 members of the SERT team present, including Lieutenant O'Hara.
And if you recall, where were they located in relation to the residence?
They were directly in front of the residence.
Now, as far as their search was concerned, how was a determination made, or who, if anyone, made a determination as far as where they were going to search?
So typically, when I work with Lieutenant O'Hara, I kind of give him direction. So in this case specifically, I learned from Sergeant Buchanan that Mr. O'Keefe was found in an area between the flagpole and the fire hydrant. So we concentrated that area, and so I talked to Lieutenant O'Hara that this is going to be our parameters, and he instructed his people how to deploy or to that area.
And now, sir, as far as beyond sort of directing as far as an area is concerned, what, if any, other involvement do you typically have when it comes to the SERT team and how they conduct their search?
They're professionals with expertise in that, so essentially I just point them in the direction, and it's up to them to figure out how to deploy it and get the mission done.
And so what, if any, involvement do you have as far as when they begin and how many people are involved, or when they end, or anything like that?
I'll have some consultation with Lieutenant O'Hara, but it's really his call to make.
And as far as this particular search on January 29th, do you know how many members of the SERT team eventually responded and how the search was conducted?
There were 7 members. Most, if not all, had typical snow shovels, and they used those shovels to systematically go through the snowbank that was in front of 34 Fairview within these 2 parameters.
And over the course of, now as far as where they were searching, can you describe sort of the road conditions as far as snow removal had concerned, or where the precipitation amounts were concentrated with respect to the road?
So the road was only plowed really right down the middle. Barely 2 vehicles could get by at a time. The snowbanks on either side of the road were protruding into the road. So that was kind of the snow setup. Our cruisers were just kind of buried in snowbanks a little bit down the road as we excavated this.
And, sir, as far as this search was concerned, what, if any, information did you provide to Lieutenant O'Hara as far as items being searched for, or what was he directed to be looking for?
There were 2 items specifically. We were looking for potential pieces of a taillight of a vehicle and a shoe.
And as far as a shoe and potential pieces of a taillight, where did that information come from, or why were those the items that were being looked for?
Relative to the shoe, when Sergeant Buchanan and Trooper Proctor responded to Good Samaritan Hospital and collected the clothing of Mr. O'Keefe, they realized that there was only 1 shoe present at the hospital. They had contacted the Canton EMS and other people who cared for him, and they'd learned that a shoe wasn't removed at the scene, and that when Canton Fire and EMS arrived, Mr. O'Keefe only had 1 shoe on. So it was important to locate that second shoe. Relative to the taillight, we'd gotten information that witnesses stated that Miss Reed's vehicle had a broken taillight, and so we were looking for evidence of it being broken at that location.
And with respect to the search that was conducted by Lieutenant O'Hara and members from the SERT team, where was that in relation to either the roadway or the front lawn of 34 Fairview?
Well, as we were excavating this, or as they were excavating this snowbank in front of it, we realized that the snowbank protruded about 3 feet into the roadway. So as they were moving this first part of the snowbank, we're essentially shoveling the road. And so as they continued on there, they would then hit the curb area.
And as far as beyond the curb area, as far as grass or the front lawn, was the SERT team members, from your observations, able to go beyond the curb into the front lawn area?
No, they're having difficulty shoveling with plastic snow shovels onto the lawn, from the lawn.
And Your Honor, may I approach the witness? Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Lieutenant Tully, with respect to the SERT team and their search, what, if anything, did you do to document and memorialize their efforts as far as any items that were recovered?
I took photographs of items that were eventually found in place and documented them in a report, and they were collected in evidence bags.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
And sir, with respect to, I'm going to place before you Rule 2, I'm going to direct your attention to what's been marked as Exhibits 111 through 134, and just in general, I'm just going to ask you to recognize.
I do.
What do you recognize those to be?
The photographs that I took that afternoon.
May I approach this to retrieve, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, I don't want to belabor the point, but if I could just publish just a couple of these exhibits.
Okay.
Lieutenant. Lieutenant, there should be a laser pointer on the desk before you. If I could ask, first of all, do you recognize what's up on the screen as Exhibit 111?
Yes.
And what do you recognize that to be?
The front of 34 Fairview Road in Canton and the flagpole I previously mentioned.
And if you could, using the laser pointer, just direct the jury's attention to what, if anything, of significance you observe in this exhibit.
So this picture was taken to memorialize this piece of red plastic here.
And again, Lieutenant, do you recognize what's up on the screen as Exhibit 114?
Yes.
And if you could, using the laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to what, if anything, of significance you observed there.
It's that same previously mentioned red plastic. The purposes of the multiple photographs, I'll take one as overalls, and as I get closer, I'll take more photographs to get better context.
And these photographs of these items, were they taken, the items that you're photographing, were they moved in any way prior to you memorializing them with photographs?
Yes, this piece in particular, a SERT team member, as he was removing the snow with the shovel, had picked up this piece of plastic with it. I asked him to place it back where he found it, where it approximately was, so that I could memorialize it in place.
So it was picked up and you asked him to put it back where he found it, and he did so?
Yes.
And again, Lieutenant, do you recognize what's up on the screen as Exhibit 117?
Yes.
What do you recognize that?
Members of the SERT team doing their excavation of the snowbank.
Again, sir, do you recognize what's up on the screen as Exhibit 120?
Yes.
And if you could, using the laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to what, if anything, of significance you observed in this photograph.
A black Nike sneaker with a white sole that was recovered in the snowbank.
And at some point subsequent to this, what, if any, comparison did you do visually with the sneaker that you observed in this photograph with respect to the sneaker that was recovered from the Good Samaritan by Trooper Proctor and Sergeant Canton?
They matched both in make and model, size. The shoe that was recovered by the troopers at the hospital was a right sneaker. This one found was the left, or a left.
And again, sir, do you recognize what's up there as 127?
Yes.
And if you could, using that laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to what, if anything, of significance you observe in that photograph.
A clear piece of plastic.
Now, with respect to this clear piece of plastic, what, if anything, did you observe or did you note of significance as far as the surface of that particular piece of clear plastic?
I noticed that it's curvature in shape, and there are raised dimples, for lack of a better term, that were along the outside of this piece of plastic, or on one side of it.
And again, Lieutenant, do you recognize what's up on the screen as Exhibit 131?
Yes.
What do you recognize that?
That is a photograph that I took at 34 Fairview that depicts a red piece of plastic.
Now, with respect to the items that were observed and photographed by you on January 29th during the SERT team search, what happened with those items from the scene?
They were collected, placed in an evidence bag, and brought back to our offices to be secured.
And if you could, as far as the evidence sort of system is conducted with regard to this case and other cases and investigations within your unit, can you explain to the jury that process of sort of when an item is seen or an item of evidentiary value is seized, what happens?
Well, first, to provide context, by policy, I am the evidence officer for the unit, and I have assistant evidence officers who assist me in the caretaking of the evidence. So we'll use this particular instance where evidence is collected at a scene, it's memorialized in place, placed in, if it's the right shape and the right condition, in a paper bag with some notes placed on the outside of the bag, transported to our office where it's secured either in a temporary locker or the permanent evidence area.
And as far as when it's taken into custody and put into a bag, what is sort of the protocol or the policies with regard to how that bag is marked or what is done with that bag once you have the item contained there?
There's certain pieces of information that will typically go in the bag, the name of the person who is picking the evidence up, put in the bag, the date, time, location, a brief description of the evidence contained in the bag. And it will then be taped, and initials will be placed on the tape to memorialize who did the taping and the date in which the taping occurred.
And as far as the supervisor, as far as evidence is concerned, you mentioned that there are some evidence officers who are assistants to you as the actual evidence officer.
Yes.
And at this time, on January 29th, 2022, who were those evidence officers within your unit?
Relative to the homicide section, it was Trooper Jeff Kotkowski and Trooper David DeChico.
Now, with respect to the evidence storage at your office, can you explain to the jury sort of how that's managed, where it is, and how items are checked in to evidence once they're seized?
We have an evidence tracking system. So as evidence comes in, we place it into the system. A label will be created and placed on the outside with the case number and an item number specific to that bag. It will be placed into the evidence room, which is locked in 2 different methods and has an alarm code pad, and you need your ID pass to swipe in order to enter. And only certain members of the unit have access and know the code to the alarm. Me obviously being the one, and the 2 assistant evidence officers. And that's subject to inspection by the state police frequently.
And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but at this time, it's essentially yourself, Trooper DeChico, and Trooper Kotkowski, who had access to that evidence storage area?
Yes.
Now, with respect to the remainder of the troopers within your unit, would they have access to that same evidence storage area?
No.
Now, with respect to your unit at this time, late January of 2022, how many troopers were in your unit or under your supervision in the detective unit at that time?
There were 13 under my supervision for the unit as a whole. Specific to the homicide section, there were 4 troopers and 1 sergeant.
And that number, as far as 4 troopers and 1 sergeant, is that sort of a typical number, a low number, high number?
Historically for Norfolk, that was a low number. We have since had more transfers come into the unit.
And how many do you supervise within the homicide unit at this point?
1 sergeant and 7 troopers.
Now, with respect to the evidence storage area, is there sort of a temporary versus a permanent storage area contained within that locked and coded storage area?
Yes.
And can you describe sort of the difference between the 2 and how things are managed by either you or your assistants with regard to evidence within the locked storage area?
So because only essentially 3 people have access to the permanent storage area, if a member collects evidence and brings it back to the office and does not have access to the main storage area, we have another temporary storage area that is allowed by policy where they can then secure the evidence. The next available time, the person who has access to the main room will come in and transport that piece of evidence from the temporary area to the permanent area.
As far as that transportation or transmission from the temporary area to the permanent area, what, if any, sort of documentation is generated in regard into that?
There's no notation from one location to the other as allowed by policy.
And as far as when items are seized and when their labels are sort of printed in relation to those items, is that always done sort of simultaneously when the item comes in, or how is that typically done timely?
Well, same with the label printing system. So only the evidence officers have the ability to create the labels and put it into the system. So you need them to create the label. So if a member comes in, doesn't have access to that system, place it in temporary storage area at the next available opportunity for an evidence officer or the assistant evidence officer to arrive, know that there's evidence there and process it, place a label on it, and stick it in the permanent storage area.
Now, with respect to those items that you recovered from 34 Fairview Road at the roadway in front of it, where were those items located with respect to each other?
They were, in total, within a 5-foot area. So if you're looking at the house, from right to left was how they were found. First was that first picture you displayed, which was the red piece of plastic. About 3 feet from that was the Nike sneaker. About 1 or 2 feet to the left of that was the clear plastic, and just next to that was another piece of red plastic along the curb of the road.
And as far as those items that were recovered and bagged and placed in evidence on January 29th, did you have occasion to bring those items with you to court today?
Yes.
And Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Sir, I am presenting you a bag.
Brought my own.
Lieutenant, first, just with reference to the item I placed before you, do you recognize that?
Yes.
And what do you recognize that to be?
The bag that contains the left sneaker that was seized from 34 Fairview Road that day, outside the residence.
And Your Honor, with the court's permission, may the witness remove that item from the bag and display it for the jury.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. If you could place that in the bag. Your Honor, the Commonwealth will seek to introduce and admit as the next exhibit.
Okay.
Sir, I'm handing you 2 separate bags. Do those without you finish. Do you recognize each of those respective bags, sir?
Yes.
What do you recognize those to be?
The bags that contain the red and clear plastic pieces that were recovered from the roadway in front of 34 Fairview Road.
And, sir, if you could, just with respect to each of those bags, read what is listed as a description on the outside of the bag to the jury.
The description on this first one is pieces of clear hard plastic tail light cover. Location 34 Fairview Road, Canton.
And the second, please.
The description is pieces of red hard plastic tail light cover. Location 34 Fairview Road, Canton.
And, Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would ask that the witness be allowed to open each of those bags and display the items for the jury.
Okay.
Your Honor, the Commonwealth will seek to introduce and admit those as the next exhibit.
All right. Mr. Jackson, they're coming in.
No objection, Your Honor. Thank you.
570.
Now, Lieutenant, before we get to the next item before you, if I could just ask a couple questions in regard to the search. January 29, 2022, about what time is it that you arrive in the area of 34 Fairview?
About 5:30.
And had yourself or any members of your unit, to your knowledge, been at 34 Fairview at any point in time prior to your arrival there that day?
No.
Objection.
No, I'll allow it as to whether he knows whether they were or not. No.
And about how long was it that you were on scene at 34 Fairview that day?
About an hour.
Now, with respect to when these items were found, do you know approximately what time the first item was located by a member of the SERT team?
Yes.
And what time was that?
5:45.
Now, with respect to at any point in time that you were on scene at 34 Fairview Road on January 29th, 2022, was either Trooper Proctor or Sergeant Mechanic on scene at 34 Fairview while you were there?
No.
And with respect to around that time, as their supervisor, were you aware of where they were or their location at that time?
Yes.
And where was that?
They were following a tow truck that was towing Miss Reed's vehicle from Dighton to Canton.
Now, with respect to the vehicle and/or the pieces of red and clear plastic that were found by the SERT team at 34 Fairview Road on January 29th, what, if any, conversation did you have with respect to Lieutenant O'Hara in regard to the vehicle and sort of the damage on the vehicle?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
We wanted to know what we were looking for. Specifically, Lieutenant O'Hara wanted to know what are we looking for and what's the scope of the items we're looking for. So we had discussion about how much taillight we believed was missing from Ms. Reed's vehicle, so that as we go along, we would know if we had it enough, or we had it all, I should say.
And so with respect to that, what, if anything, were you able to share with Lieutenant O'Hara with respect to Ms. Reed's vehicle at that particular time?
I didn't have much information because it was still on a tow truck or being loaded up into the Canton Police Department at that time, so I didn't have any actual knowledge of how much taillight we're looking for.
And prior to you leaving from the scene at 34 Fairview Road, along with the SERT team on that date of January 29th, even at that time, did you know the full extent or how much taillight you were looking for at that time?
No.
Now, sir, if I could ask you just to, with the court's permission, Your Honor, may he remove the items from that second bag
Yes.
before him? Lieutenant, from the two items that you have before you in your hand, you had met reference to one of those clear pieces having some sort of stippling or raised surfaces on it. Is that correct?
Yes.
And if you could just with your finger or just in some way delineate to the jury where you observe that to be.
So you can see it as you look through it. You can see almost bubbling of it. And as you run your finger along, you can feel indentations along there, as well as the ridges that are along the top end here that appear on both pieces.
And Lieutenant, if you could, you can place those items back in the bag. And Your Honor, the Commonwealth would seek to introduce and admit as the next exhibit.
No objection.
Exhibit 571.
You?
Now, Lieutenant Tully, you were testifying yesterday. You were testifying in some part about a search that you did in conjunction with the SERT team at 34 Fairview on January 29, 2022, correct?
Yes.
And at any point in time, did you or any other member of your unit conduct any search of the residence at 34 Fairview Road?
No.
And why not?
We had no reason to believe there'd be evidence found within the home of 34 Fairview Road.
Now, Lieutenant, if you could you inform the jury a little bit about sort of search warrants as far as residences go and what is required in Massachusetts for you to conduct a search warrant?
Objection.
So we haven't heard the question. Let's hear the question.
That was the question, I'm sorry.
I thought it was you informed the jury about search warrants and then what?
No, if I interrupted
Did you
you,
complete your question?
I did, Your Honor, yes.
Okay. So it's sustained then?
thank you.
As far as, Lieutenant, over the course of your career, you've conducted search warrants of people's residences, correct?
Yes.
And what do you need to do that?
A search warrant, consent, or exigent circumstance.
And as far as a search warrant is concerned, what is needed or what is necessary in order for you to get a search warrant?
Objection.
Jody? Tell Timmy to be quiet. So I'm going to allow him to build a foundation here. So the objection's overruled.
As governed by the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Article 14 of the Massachusetts Constitution, law enforcement is required to get a search warrant if we're going to invade someone's privacy. In order to obtain a search warrant, I need to gather facts that I swear an oath and affirm that are true and accurate, that there is probable cause, which means more likely than not that a specific piece of evidence will be found in a specific location and it's related to a crime. So I need to check those boxes in order to obtain a search warrant through the trial court.
And what, if any, information did you have related to specific evidence of a crime in relation to the interior of the residence at 34 Fairview Road?
I didn't have any. When thinking about residence and search warrants and evidence, I need to put the evidence inside the house. And so I don't believe that Mr. O'Keefe entered the home. So I had no nexus to the house.
And what, if any, evidence did you have that Mr. O'Keefe had ever entered the home at 34 Fairview Road on January 29th or on any other day?
I don't. On the contrary, I have evidence that he was outside, but I don't have anything putting him inside the residence.
Now, you're aware that, or you testified yesterday, that at some point while you and the SERT team were conducting the search at 34 Fairview, that Sergeant Mechanic and Trooper Proctor were following a tow truck with the defendant's vehicle from Dighton to the Canton Police Department, correct?
Yes.
And in reference to taking the vehicle to the Canton Police Department, how was that decision arrived at? What, if any, discussion, or what, if any, other options did you have?
So Sergeant Mechanic and I had conversations. It was ultimately my decision of where the vehicle was going to go. And so we need to find a location that was secure, indoors, and preferably heated. And so we start going through checklists of what's available. So you start thinking, obviously, of state police facilities. So between Dighton and Canton, where our office is as well, you have the Foxborough Barracks, which was, I worked out of the Foxborough Barracks. The garage was probably not appropriate for that large vehicle to get in there. It's an old building. I worked at the State Police Barracks in Milton. That's even worse, with a smaller garage that's attached inside of an older building. So the Canton Police Department was the next step. It was kind of checked all those boxes. It was inside, it was secure, and it was heated.
Now, over the course of your career, specifically within the homicide unit of the detective unit of the district attorney's office, approximately how many investigations have you led or been a part of in relation to? Let me first ask you this: as far as your unit is concerned, how is it that, from a staffing perspective, how is it that an investigation is conducted as far as certain roles, or can you speak a little bit about sort of the roles that different people within your unit play with reference to an investigation, just in a general sense?
Within the unit, we have different sections. We have the homicide section, narcotics section, and special investigations. So each is kind of broken up into that. Obviously, the homicide section will undertake homicide investigations, but we work as a team. So there'll be situations where you may need an all hands on deck just to get some people out there. So the narcotics folks will help with homicide investigations and vice versa. The homicide people will help with narcotics investigations when needed.
Your Honor, may I just have a moment?
Yes.
Now, specifically when it comes to a death investigation, there's someone who's assigned as what you call a case officer, is that correct?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury what the role of the case officer is, and what, if any, other sort of supervision there is with reference to that case officer?
The case officer is essentially the central collection point for the investigation. So they are the person that would gather the evidence, the records, hold those records, and then somebody needs to be held accountable for a to-do list or something to do. Supervisor would go to that one person, as well as the district attorney's office would know who to contact about a certain case, and then we'll go from there. Obviously, that case officer usually is a rank of trooper, especially when you're talking about unattended deaths. They have a sergeant and 2 lieutenants that are supervising them in that realm.
And as far as interviews are concerned, what, if any, sort of policy is there with regard to troopers, and how many would be involved in the interview of any witness?
We would always have 2 people present, either a trooper and a local detective, or 2 troopers. Just one ask questions, one take note-taking. It's just good practice.
And with respect to this investigation, the locals, as far as Canton Police Department, was not something that you utilized, correct?
Correct.
And again, I know you testified a little bit about it yesterday, but if you could just reiterate or expound upon sort of what your discussions were with the chief as far as Canton Police Department's involvement in this investigation going forward, following the early morning hours of January 29th.
Our conversation circled around in the early hours about the homeowner of 34 Fairview, which was Brian Albert, has a brother, Kevin Albert, who was a detective with the Canton Police Department. And so where we were, we had essentially zero information about the investigation. We wanted to remove any appearance of conflict by not having Kevin Albert or any of his coworkers involved in the investigation.
Was that in the investigation in its entirety, or the interviewing process, or how was that sort of delineated, if at all?
Definitely no interviews. They were not involved in any discussion. Essentially the entire investigation.
And as far as the case officer is concerned, is the case officer someone who, particularly in a homicide investigation, is as far as a decision regarding charging, is that something that the case officer would be tasked with?
No.
Now, turning your attention back to your testimony yesterday, there were items that you had retrieved from the SERT team search on January 29th, correct?
Yes.
And as a precursor, if I could ask you sort of, over the course of your career, specifically within the homicide unit with the district attorney's office, about how many death investigations, homicide investigations have you been involved in?
I would say in excess of 600 unattended death investigations that I personally investigated. That's not counting those phone calls the calls I end up declining that I'd mentioned yesterday. In addition to that, I probably have either worked or supervised 75 homicides. And then getting back to the unattended deaths, I've supervised countless since I've attained the rank of trooper and lieutenant. Sergeant and lieutenant.
And with respect to your training and with respect to your experience, how many of those investigations have involved injuries which included abrasions?
Probably 10 to 20% of them.
And if you could, at least from your understanding, if you could explain to the jury what your understanding of what is an abrasion.
Objection.
Sustained.
With regard to the items that you recovered on January 29th, there was one piece of clear plastic you testified yesterday had something that you termed as stippling on the outside, correct?
Yeah, I may have used the word dimples, but yeah.
Now, with respect to Mr. O'Keefe, at some point, did you have occasion to view photos of Mr. O'Keefe from the Good Samaritan Hospital?
Yes.
And with regard to the items that you recovered, what, if any, significance did you observe between those items and the injuries that you observed to Mr. O'Keefe?
The injuries to Mr. O'Keefe, I noticed the abrasions had a certain pattern on them. And I know that when a blunt force object is involved in causing an abrasion, the characteristics of the object that comes in contact with a person will often leave the characteristics on that person in the form of an abrasion.
And with respect to this specific case, as far as any items recovered on January 29th and your observations of Mr. O'Keefe, what, if anything, did you observe of any significance in relation to that?
I'd be comfortable in saying that the marks on Mr. O'Keefe are consistent with.
Objection.
Sustained.
Now, sir, if I could turn your attention two other members of your units are troopers by the name of Trooper Dunn and Trooper Moore, is that correct?
Yes.
And on February 2nd, 2022, are you familiar with them retrieving some video in relation to this investigation?
Yes.
And specifically from the town of Canton, did they retrieve video from there?
Yes.
And specifically, what location did they retrieve video from?
From the Canton Public Library at 786 Washington Street.
And are you familiar with them speaking with a gentleman by the name of Mr. Jutras?
Yes.
And he's an IT person with the town of Canton.
He is.
And as far as the timestamp with regard to the video that was retrieved from the Canton Public Library, what, if any, information do you have in reference to that?
Whenever we retrieve video, we want to ensure the timestamp is accurate, because as we've learned, businesses are not always great about updating the timestamp, so that's always top of mind when we collect video. Mr. Jutras assured us that the timestamp on the video was consistent and in real time.
Now, the following day of February 3rd, you familiar with Trooper Moore retrieving some additional surveillance video?
Yes.
And where did he retrieve that video
From Temple Beth Abraham in Canton at 1301 Washington Street.
Now, as far as those two locations, as far as the Canton Public Library and the Temple Beth Abraham, are you familiar with where they are in relation to each other?
Yes.
Both located on Washington Street, is that correct?
Yes.
And about how far away from each other are they?
About a mile and a half.
Now, with reference to the Temple video, what, if any, information did you receive in regard to the timestamp on that video?
That was also accurate.
Now, from each of these respective locations, what time frames was Trooper Moore in one instance and Trooper Moore and Trooper Dunn in the other instance? What time frames of video did they retrieve from each of those respective locations?
From 12 a.m. midnight to 1 a.m. and from 5 a.m. to 6 a.m.
And why was it that those were the time frames, based on what you learned to that point in the investigation, why were those the time frames that the troopers were looking for?
We had reason to believe that those were the times that Miss Reed's vehicle was traveling in and around that area.
And get to that a little bit more in a moment, but as far as reason to believe that, that Ms. Reed's vehicle was traveling in the area around those times, what, if any, information did you have to base that on?
We had statements and video from the Waterfall Bar and Grill, also on Washington Street, a little bit further down, and the car departing in that direction. We had information about a car that matched her description arriving at 34 Fairview at a certain time shortly before 12:30 a.m. And so, like we always do, we do out a video canvas and look for video cameras from that first known point, which would be the Waterfall Bar and Grill, to the residence of 34 Fairview, and then from there, from 34 Fairview to 1 Meadows Ave, which was the home of John O'Keefe.
In reference to the morning hours between 5 and 6 a.m., the later morning hours between 5 and 6 a.m., what, if any, information did you have in relation to Ms. Reed's travel at that time?
So we had learned through interviews that she was calling people as early as 4:45 in an effort to locate Mr. O'Keefe, and a statement that she had left the house shortly after 5 a.m. We then know that she arrived at the McCabe residence on Country Lane after 5:30, so we're trying to account for the movements of the vehicle for that 30-minute block.
Now, in reference to phone calls, you've had occasion to review information related to the defendant's phone.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that about 4:45 in the morning, she made phone calls trying to ascertain, or allegedly trying to ascertain the whereabouts of Mr. O'Keefe. Is that correct?
Yes.
Prior to those 4:45 a.m. phone calls, were there other phone calls that the defendant placed?
Yes.
And to whom did she place those calls and about what time?
Starting at 12:33 a.m. to 6:03 a.m., there were 53 phone calls from Ms. Reed to a phone number associated with John O'Keefe.
And in addition to those phone calls to Mr. O'Keefe's phone, what, if any, other calls did the defendant make prior to those 4:45 a.m. calls?
There were phone calls to her family members, to Jennifer McCabe, Kerry Roberts, the Camaranos. Those are the ones that are off the top of my head. I have the notes in front of me if I want me to refer to them.
You all right to with this man?
Yes.
Would you like me to continue, ADA Lally?
Yes, please.
After 6:03, when Mr. O'Keefe was found, there are a number of calls to members of John O'Keefe's family.
No, the phone calls to family members of her own, the defendant's family members, those were specifically to her mother and her father, is that correct?
Yes.
And did those phone calls precede the phone calls to either Ms. McCabe or Ms. Roberts or anybody else earlier that morning?
On the call detail records, they don't appear, but I know the phone dump has other information.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Lieutenant, turning your attention back to the videos we were speaking about, showing you a disc, just asking you if you recognize that.
I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
It is surveillance video from Temple Beth Abraham.
May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
I want to seek to introduce them as the next exhibit.
No objection.
Thank you.
Exhibit 572.
572.
May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
And you another document. You recognize that, sir?
I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
It is a map I created with icons of the town of Canton.
And how did you create that map, sir?
Using Google Earth as the mapping software, I placed icons on locations within the town of Canton that are relative to this investigation to provide better context and illustrate the area that we're going to be discussing.
May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
I want to seek to introduce them as the next exhibit.
Okay.
No objection.
Thank you. Exhibit 573.
Lieutenant, do you have the laser pointer there before you again?
I do.
So using that laser pointer, if you could direct the jury's attention to the icons that you inserted a reference to various points of relevant locations, as well as any sort of route to travel or roadways depicted in this video.
So each icon is a house-shaped icon that I placed at different locations. The first one is red in color. It denotes where 34 Fairview Road is. Starting at the bottom, there is a pinkish color one that is the location of the Waterfall Bar and Grill. Just north of that, you'll see a brown one, which denotes the Canton Public Library. Following up this street here, which is Washington Street, you'll come to Temple Beth Abraham, which is denoted by the blue icon there. And then off to the right is 1 Meadows Lane with the green icon.
Now, as far as, and if you could just use that laser pointer again to know where the temple is.
It is the blue icon in the center of the map.
Now, as far as where the temple is located in reference to specific roadways, it's, you mentioned, located on Washington Street, correct?
Yes.
And so what, if any, roads intersect with Washington Street around the location of the temple?
Chapman Street is the street that runs in this direction towards Washington Street. So again, the Washington Street is this street here. It continues and stays Washington Street as it turns slightly east in that direction.
And as far as available points of directionality or ways to travel roadways from the area of the temple, it intersects in the area of Dedham, is that correct?
Yes.
And so as far as available routes of travel from the temple to 34 Fairview, if you could denote those on the map.
If one was at the temple and were to travel to 34 Fairview, you could continue up Washington Street, take the left onto Dedham Street, which is that street you just mentioned, a left onto Cedar Crest, and to enter that neighborhood down here. One could take a left and come down Chapman Street and take the right to enter the neighborhood in that direction, straight onto Fairview Road.
And if you're approaching sort of from the Chapman Street side of Fairview Road, as you come down Fairview Road, which side of the road would 34 Fairview be on?
Left.
And similarly, if you're approaching from the Cedar Crest side of Fairview Road and you turn on Fairview Road, which side of the street would 34 Fairview Road be on?
Right.
Thanks. Now, with respect to each of these videos, as far as the Canton Public Library video and the Temple video, these are exterior cameras, is that correct?
Yes.
And sort of orientation-wise, where do they focus on or where are they pointed at?
The ones that we focused on were the ones that captured Washington Street.
Now, are you aware of another location right around the area of the Temple Beth Abraham called Cassie's?
Yes.
And that's essentially like a convenience store, is that right?
Yes.
And were you able to, you or other troopers able to retrieve video from that location as well?
I don't believe so.
Now, Your Honor, with the court's permission, if I could publish a portion of the video from the Canton Public Library, which is marked as Exhibit 110.
Yes.
You could pause. Now, again, for orientation purposes, Lieutenant, if you could, using the laser pointer, just describe to the jury sort of what we're looking at here directionality-wise and what you observe in this video.
The main street in the video is Washington Street. The Waterfall Bar and Grill would be off to the right-hand side, and Temple Beth Abraham would be off to the left. The intersecting road we're looking at here is Sherman Ave, I believe.
And if one were to take that right, if you're coming from the right of the screen to the left of the screen on Washington Street heading towards Sherman, and you were to take that right on Sherman, where does that take you?
You would head towards the neighborhood that 1 Meadows Ave resides.
Now, were you also able, over the course of the investigation, did you have occasion to look at surveillance video from the Waterfall Bar and Grill itself?
Yes.
And from that video, were you able to determine a time at which Mr. O'Keefe was leaving from that establishment?
Yes.
And what, if any, observations as far as time, or what, if any, observations did you make as far as what Mr. O'Keefe was doing or had with him when he left the office?
When he left shortly after midnight, he was holding what appears to be a clear glass container.
And do you recall which hand he was holding it in?
His right.
And specifically, that was about 12 or 11 a.m., is that correct?
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could, I'm going to ask you to press play here and then pause again at 12:15:58. Now, looking up at the screen now where it's paused at 12:15:58, Lieutenant, what, if anything, do you observe there?
I observe a large black SUV here on Washington Street.
And the large black SUV that you observed, is that consistent with what you've observed of the defendant's vehicle?
Yes.
And if you could, describe to the jury as far as when I asked Ms. Gilman to press play, what is that vehicle going to do?
It's going to continue north on Washington Street through the intersection on Sherman and continue north on Washington Street.
And what, if anything, is sort of in that directionality as it continues off of the screen to the left?
Be heading towards Temple Beth Abraham.
Ms. Gilman, if you could. Ms. Gilman, you can pause it there. Now, with respect, Your Honor, with the court's permission, if I could publish portions of the Temple video.
Yes.
And just as a continuing, my intention would be to sort of go back and forth if that's all right with the court.
Okay? Yes.
And if you could pause there, thank you. Again, for orientation purposes, Lieutenant, if you could describe using the laser pointer there as far as what we're looking at in this particular camera angle and shot, and as far as the roadways that you observe.
This is an exterior camera from Temple Beth Abraham at 1301 Washington Street. Where it's paused now at 1201, I believe is the timestamp, you see a vehicle. Here, that vehicle's traveling on Washington Street. We are now on the other side of Washington Street looking at it than we were from the library. The south and towards the waterfall and the library would be off to the left. North would be off to the right.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could fast forward to 12:17. If you could pause it. Now, as far as the time concerns, the video from the prior video from the library was about 12:15 a.m. when you saw the vehicle consistent with the defendants pass by that location.
Yes.
And so as far as this time that's up here now, approximately 12:17 or so, or somewhere within that minute between 12:17 and 12:18, is that consistent with the time it would take to travel from where the library is on Washington Street to where the temple is on Washington Street?
Yes.
And from this particular time period around 12:17, between the minutes of 12:17 and 12:18, what, if anything, did you observe with reference to, of significance with reference to this investigation on this portion of this video?
At approximately 12:17 and 56 seconds, you'll see a large black SUV travel from left to right on the screen, which again would be northbound.
And again, left to right on the screen, just for orientation purposes, what is in the direction from left to right on the screen as far as of any significance to this?
As you continue north on Washington Street, you would, I believe the next intersection on the left is Dedham Street, which one could take to get to 34 Fairview Road.
Is Ms. Gilman, if you could, and I would ask you again to pause it at 12:17. And again, Lieutenant, directing your attention to the screen, and if you could, using the laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to what, if anything, of significance you observe in this portion of the video at 12:17:56 from the Temple.
A large black SUV traveling northbound on Washington Street.
And the large black SUV, is that consistent with the large black SUV that you observed in the prior video, Exhibit 110 from the Canton Public Library?
Yes.
Is that also consistent with what you observed as far as your personal observations of the defendant's vehicle?
Yes.
Gentlemen, if you could please press play. Gentlemen, you can pause that. Take that down, please. Ms. Gilman, if I could ask you for the Canton Public Library video again. Now, Lieutenant, directing your attention to up on the screen, this is the Canton Public Library video again, Exhibit 110.
Yes.
And as far as this is the time frame that you were talking about before, between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. that Troopers Dunn and Moore retrieved from Mr. Jutras, correct?
Yes.
And with reference to, as far as the conditions outside at this particular time between 5 and 6 a.m., what, if anything, did you observe in this video?
The ground is now covered in snow.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could ask you to fast forward to about 5:11 a.m. and pause it there. Now, Lieutenant, from this portion of this video from the Canton Public Library, what, if anything, of significance did you observe in this portion of the video relevant to this investigation?
You observe a large black SUV take a left from Sherman Street onto Washington Street, heading south.
And as far as the directionality from where that vehicle came from and the directionality where that vehicle is headed toward, what, if any, of the locations of significance are located in those areas?
So again, Sherman Street or Ave goes straight to 1 Meadows. So if one were to travel from Meadows Ave, the residence of John O'Keefe, to this location here, you would come down Sherman and you could take a left onto Washington Street to head south.
And as far as south on Washington Street, again, off to the right of the screen, what, if any, locations of significance in this case are located in that direction?
The Waterfall Bar and Grill.
Now, as far as the black SUV that you observed in this video, is that consistent with the black SUV you observed in the Temple video from 12:17 a.m.?
Yes.
Is it also consistent with the black SUV that you observed in the library video from 12:15 a.m.?
Yes.
And is it also consistent with the defendant's black SUV?
Yes.
Now, with reference to, are you familiar with Mr. O'Keefe's home having ring cameras affixed to it?
Yes.
And are you familiar with a video from those ring cameras depicting the defendant backing the black SUV out of Mr. O'Keefe's garage at approximately 5:07 a.m.?
Yes.
And from that, as far as distance or time it would take to travel from Mr. O'Keefe's residence to this intersection covered by the Canton Public Library, from 5:07 to 5:11, now depicted on the screen, is that consistent with the time it would take to drive that, particularly given the conditions?
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could, please press play. Ms. Gilman, if you could pause that. Now, Ms. Gilman, if you could fast forward to about 5 minutes, I'm sorry, 15 and 30 seconds. Pause there, please. Now, Lieutenant, between these time frames of 5:11 a.m. and 5:15 a.m., at any point in time, do you observe the black SUV traveling back in the other direction?
Yes.
And specifically, around 5:15 and 51 seconds, what, if anything, did you observe on this video of significance or relevance to this investigation?
A large black SUV will appear on the screen on the right-hand side and travel to the left-hand side, which again would be traveling north on Washington Street.
Now, as far as, again, directionality, north on Washington Street to the left of the screen would be towards the Temple, is that correct?
Yes.
And as far as the operation, as far as directionality is concerned, what you observed in this area from 5:15 a.m., is that consistent with what you observed on the Canton Public Library video earlier at 12:15 a.m.?
Yes.
And again, as far as the black SUV that you observe in this, it's consistent with all the other black SUVs you observed in the video and the defendant's vehicle, correct?
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could press play. pause there. And Lieutenant, if you could, using the laser pointer you have before you, direct the jury's attention to where you observe the black SUV.
Here on Washington Street, near the intersection.
And again, using that laser pointer, if you could just indicate to the jury as far as directionality where this vehicle is going to head on this vehicle.
North would be to the left-hand side of the screen, towards Temple Beth Abraham.
Ms. Gilman, if you could press play again. And if you could pause there, Ms. Gilman, you can take this one. You can pause there, Ms. Gilman. And for the record, this is from the Temple Beth Abraham video. This is from the period of 5:10 a.m. to 5:20 a.m., which is the second video listed down within those. Now, Trooper, with regard to this video, at some point around 5:18 a.m., what, if anything, did you observe of significance or relevance to this investigation from that period of the video?
A large black SUV travel left to right on the screen.
And again, as far as directionality, where would that vehicle be coming from and where would that vehicle be heading toward?
The left side of the screen would be in the direction of the Canton Public Library and the Waterfall Bar and Grill. Off to the right, again, would be the intersection with Dedham Street, which one could take to 34 Fairview.
And as far as directionality, with reference to the earlier video from 12:17 a.m. from the Temple Beth Abraham, is directionality consistent in this video with what you observed at 12:17 a.m.?
Yes.
Now, Ms. Gilman, if you could play from 5:18. Pause the poll, please. And Lieutenant, what, if anything, do you observe in this portion of the video relevant to this investigation?
A large black SUV traveling north on Washington Street.
And again, is that large black SUV that you observe here consistent with the large black SUV you observed in the prior videos and also consistent with the defendant's vehicle?
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could please press play again. Thank you, Ms. Gilman. You can take that. Now, Lieutenant, through the course of your investigation, are you familiar with what time it was that the defendant, approximately what time it was that the defendant arrived at Ms. McCabe's home?
5:35, approximately.
And Ms. McCabe's home is located on Country Lane, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, from the directionality of that vehicle in the 5:18 a.m. Video, as far as timing is concerned, 5:18 to about 5:35 or so, is that consistent with the time it would take to drive from that area of the Temple Beth Abraham to Ms. McCabe's residence on Country Lane?
No, not if you were to drive directly there.
And so to that point, as far as what about that time doesn't match up? Is it too short, too long, or something else?
It would take you much quicker to get there. It's about 1.5 miles from Temple Beth Abraham to Country Lane. You would continue north on Washington Street and just take a left into the Country Lane neighborhood. So the time to travel, 1.5 miles.
And from sort of the distance between either that Temple video and either 34 Fairview Road or Country Lane, were you able to find, locate, or retrieve any surveillance video in those areas that would capture the vehicle?
No.
Now, as far as you had mentioned earlier in your testimony when we were talking about the earlier 12:17 a.m. Portion from the Temple Beth Abraham video, the directionality of that black SUV, both in the 12:17 and the 5:18, where is Fairview Road in relation to the directionality of the SUV that you observed?
That SUV could take a left onto Dedham Street and then a left onto Cedar Crest to enter down to Fairview Road.
And from your knowledge of the area as far as travel is concerned, would from 5:18 to about 5:35 or so, would that allow for sufficient time to go from where it's viewable on the Temple Beth Abraham video for the vehicle to then travel to 34 Fairview Road and then travel to 12 Country Lane?
Yes.
Now, I believe you had mentioned earlier in your testimony that at some point there were call detail records that were obtained in reference to the defendant's phone.
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury, as far as, let me ask you this first, with regard to call detail records and with regard to phones in general, what, if any, specialized training have you received or have you given in reference to those areas of focus?
I've received over 200 hours of training relative to obtaining and using call detail records and cell phone data in furtherance of criminal investigations. Most recently, I've given talks and seminars about the topic, and I've testified in numerous courts around the Commonwealth about the topic.
Now, can you explain to the jury sort of call detail records, what they are, and how you would use them as far as utility in generally speaking in reference to investigation?
Call detail records are business records held by cell phone companies, specifically to this matter, that are created in the normal course of business. Typically, you would think about in a billing context. So if you think of your own cell phone bill, it would contain information like the date and time a communication occurred, the other phone number in which you communicated with, the duration of the call, that sort of bits of information. Obviously, as we're doing a criminal investigation, it's helpful to know with whom someone was communicating. Additionally, the cell phone companies memorialize other bits of information specific to what we refer to as CSLI, cell site listing information. They tell us the antennas that were used during the communication, usually just in the form of the first antenna and the last antenna. There are other engineering records that we can obtain that can be helpful when trying to determine where the handset, the cell phone was at any given time.
And the handset that you refer to is essentially the phone itself, correct?
Yes.
And with relation to the handset and its connection to antennas or towers, can you speak a little bit about that based on your training and experience with reference to how the handset sort of communicates with an antenna and how it gets to a specific antenna?
Cell phone companies place antennas all around to help facilitate communication. You can think of a cell phone as really a two-way radio. It's sending and receiving radio waves. So in order to facilitate that, cell phone companies place these antennas all around. Traditionally, you can think of them on a tower, but they can also be placed on the side of buildings or disguised as trees or just on top of light poles. So they're all around, but you don't quite know it. As far as how the handset communicates with the antenna, there are different variables that go into that. Now, the cell phone wants to connect to the antenna with the strongest signal. The best predictor of a strong signal is distance. So the further a radio wave travels, the more it's going to degrade and not be as strong. But there are other factors that can degrade or reduce the strength of a radio wave, specifically an obstruction. If you're in a basement of a building or standing behind a large brick wall, the radio waves aren't going to penetrate that as well. But even things like precipitation or foliage on a tree can also hinder it. And you think about rolling hills here in Massachusetts in tall buildings, they can also disrupt radio waves.
Now, as far as that sort of disruption of radio waves, are you familiar with certain areas that get sort of termed as a dead zone?
Yes.
And can you explain what your understanding of that term is as it relates to what you've been talking about as far as the handset communicating with the antenna?
I would define a dead zone as an area where there's not good cell phone coverage. So the antennas are not covering that area for whatever reason, obstruction, the density of the tower. Oftentimes, well, an antenna can only handle so many cell phones at a time. It's an idea that we coin or refer to as load. So there's only a certain number of devices that can handle an antenna. My best analogy of that is Gillette Stadium. I've worked at Gillette Stadium detail many times. We have roll call for Patriots game early in the morning. I take my post. I have strong functionality of my cell phone. As hundreds of thousands of devices are now entering the area around Gillette Stadium, the functionality of my cell phone reduces as more devices are using the antennas in that area.
Now, with respect to the cell phone companies themselves, they create or utilize this data for their own business purposes, correct?
Yes.
And can you just briefly explain a little bit about sort of what the cell phone companies would be using this kind of data for as far as what you're talking about, connections to antennas and towers?
It's a company, who wants to make money, so it's going to memorialize things to bill their customers appropriately. They're also required by the FCC to keep, for a certain period of time, certain records because they are a communications provider. So there are some requirements, regulatory, that they need to fulfill.
Now, as far as the information that you're able to glean from these call detail records, I believe you've spoken a little bit about, but as far as what, if any, limitations are there with reference to the information you're able to glean from the records?
Well, the overarching one is I can only get what I get. So whatever the company sends me, that's what I can use in my determinations. Kind of the next step is when we're talking about antennas, I will never, I'll have difficulty saying exactly where a cell phone was when using an antenna. I can make generalizations that the phone is going to be in the area of the antenna, but I would never, with just that specific information, be able to tell you exactly where it is. I can look at other records, like the engineering records, where, especially now with 4G and 5G technology, the cell phone providers need to know how far away a handset is from the antenna in order to facilitate that communication. And they keep those ranging records for me. So if I can obtain those records, I can then place a much narrower area where a cell phone would have been during a time period.
Now, in reference to this investigation, you the search warrant that Trooper Proctor did with regard to call detail records for Ms. Reed's phone, correct?
Yes.
And were you able to, or did you have occasion to look at those call detail records?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Sir, I'm showing you a 4-page document, just ask you to look at that a couple of minutes. You recognize that document, sir?
Yes.
What do you recognize it to be?
It is the subscriber information for the phone number ending in 9554.
And through the course of your investigation, as far as that phone number ending in 9554, who, if anyone, did you find that number to be associated with?
The defendant, Karen Reed.
Now, with respect to the documents before you, that has some listing of account information, is that correct?
Yes.
And who is listed as the subscriber for that account with phone number ending in 9554?
Karen Reed of 481 Gilbert Street in Mansfield, Massachusetts.
And are you, through the course of your investigation, familiar with that address of 481 Gilbert Street?
Yes.
And is that the residence of the defendant?
Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Call more critique to introduce in a minute to next exhibit.
No objection.
Okay.
Exhibit 574.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Lally.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, as far as the information that you receive with reference to call detail records, is there a section called the records key?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury what a records key is and how you use that in order to facilitate or read the records?
The records key give us the definitions of terms that are used in the record. So the record comes usually in the form of a spreadsheet or PDF. You'll get columns and rows. The columns will be named certain things, and those titles are often specific to the company. So I want to make sure that I'm reading and understanding what the data is.
Now, I believe you alluded to it earlier in testimony, but just for the jury's edification, if you could describe to the jury what your understanding of the term as far as cell site listing information and how that's used in an analysis of call detail records.
So CSLI, as it's referred to, has that billing information, time, date, duration, other phone number, and it has the antenna used during the communication. So just as it says, it's a cell site, which is the other term for antenna, as I usually use.
Now, sir, through your training experience, are you familiar with the term in reference to this type of material called ranging data?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury what you understand that term to mean and how it's used in interpretation of call detail records?
So the ranging data goes back to the engineering reports I had mentioned earlier that can provide more information. They can tell me the antennas that were used during communication. It can tell me the range in which the handset was away from the antenna. So now, opposed to just kind of making general determinations where a handset was near an antenna, I now have a range. So I will plot the location of the antenna, measure out that distance, and draw an arc with that radius of the distance on a map. And I can make an assumption that the handset is somewhere on that arc. The ranging data is also helpful because the user does not need to be actively using the phone in order for a record to be created. Right? The billing record is going to be a phone call made or received, text message made or received. A cell phone as it sits today is still communicating with the antenna. You're getting notifications, it's checking email, it's updating, and because it's utilizing the network, your cell phone provider is capturing that data and it's generating a record, even though unbeknownst to the user.
Okay, so to that point, or illustrative of that point, so if I'm standing right here with the cell phone in my pocket, not using it, not turning it on, not activating it in any way, that cell phone is still doing some sort of communication with the closest or some antenna within the vicinity?
Yes.
Now, are you also familiar with a term called UTC, or Universal Time Code?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury what that term means and how it relates to these types of records?
So UTC, or now known as Coordinated Universal Time, is the time zone along the prime meridian. So if you think of the globe, you got longitude and time zones. The prime meridian is a spot that runs through Western Europe and Western Africa. That is the line in which all time zones around the world are predicated. And UTC would be a time there, and it's not determined by daylight savings time either. So all those time zones, like I said, around the globe are predicated on that. Because it's one standard time in a globe, a lot of records will come in UTC time, and you have to make the conversion. And they will provide records specific to a cell phone, what time it was locally, but it will tell me what the UTC time was. So for me to figure out what the time was locally during the time of the communication, I got to do the conversion.
And to that point, as far as the conversion is concerned, what type of conversion are we talking?
Here on the eastern side of the United States, it's -4 hours during the summer and -5 in the winter.
Now, as far as these records are concerned, what, if any, I believe you spoke a little bit as far as the arc and plotting, but if you could expound upon that as far as explain to the jury what it is exactly you're able to do with the information from the call detail records as far as a visual representation.
You said two things there, so I want to make sure I answer the question right. You mentioned ranging data, but CSLI, so specific to the engineering report in ranging, or CSLI?
Let's first start with CSLI.
So with the CSLI, I will place on a map the location of the antenna. And I mentioned load a little bit, but that load factor determines on how dense the antennas will be from placed by the provider. So if you think of an urban environment, there's more cell phones, there's more devices that need antennas. So the locations of the antennas will be more dense. I've seen them as close as 100 yards away from each other in an urban environment. You come out to the suburbs, there are less devices. The companies are going to put less antennas because they don't want to put them up where they don't need to. They're going to be further away. So in Norfolk County, the antennas are placed anywhere from 1 mile to 4 or 5 miles apart.
And so there would be a difference as far as the amount of antennas, the amount of towers, like say in the town of Canton versus downtown Boston.
Yes.
And again, I think it's pretty clear, but which of those two, as far as downtown Boston or the town of Canton, would have more antennas or more towers for a cell phone to connect to?
Downtown Boston would have more.
And so with relation to the number of antennas or towers that a handset or a cell phone could connect to, what, if any, relation does that have to geographic location, or what you're able to glean in reference to geographic location from the call detail?
So once I place the antenna on a map, I will look at where the other antennas are, and I can make a general determination that the cell phone was closer to that antenna than other antennas. Again, there's the caveat, and I'll say it up front, is that there are other mechanisms that could prevent it from connecting to the closest tower. But generally, it's going to connect to that closest tower. Now, there are redundancies built into the system. If an antenna goes down because of it gets struck by lightning or it needs service, there are other antennas nearby that can cover an area.
Now, with respect to the CSLI data, were you able to do that in this case as far as plotting that on a visual representation on a map?
Yes.
You want me to approach?
Yes.
Sort of showing you, I believe it's a 10-page document, just ask you to review that, look up when you're finished.
And do you recognize that, sir?
Yes.
What do you recognize that?
It is a series of maps that I created depicting the records obtained from that number ending in 9554.
And that's plotted onto sort of a Google image or a Google Earth image?
I use Google Earth to create the maps. I then take a screenshot and place it typically in PowerPoint in order to make it look nice.
May I approach on?
Yes.
I'll want this thing to introduce and admit collectively as an exhibit.
No objection, Your Honor.
So, Lieutenant, directing your attention to the second page therein. And, Your Honor, with the court's permission, if I could publish this to the jury.
Okay.
Lieutenant, do you recognize what's depicted now up on the screen?
Yes.
And again, what do you recognize this to be?
It is a map that I created using the information from the call detail records, or CSLI, from that account.
And from what time period of the call detail records are we looking at in this particular representation?
From 12:33 a.m. to 12:34 a.m. Again, I had done the conversion for the purposes of making this exhibit. So if one were to look at the call detail records, you may see the UTC time. For the convenience, I've done the conversion for the purposes of the exhibit.
Now, sir, if you could, using the laser pointer before you, direct the jury's attention to what, if anything, of significance you've plotted out and put into this visual representation.
So first, we're looking at the area of the town of Canton. I've placed different landmarks, again, to give context to what we're talking about here. You see 34 Fairview Road as a yellow house icon, 1 Meadows Ave, Canton as a darker color, and the Waterfall Bar and Grill as another icon. Now, off to the left, just west of Route 95, which you'll see running here, you'll see a red triangle, which I use consistently as the antenna, and a series of letters and numbers next to them. So next to them is the numbering system that Verizon assigns to that antenna. So in this instance, we're looking at ENB, which is the antenna acronym, and specifically 57171.
And to be clear, as far as that marking with the red triangle, the ENB ID 57171, that is the antenna that the handset or the defendant's cell phone is connecting to at that point, correct?
Yes, and I always try to be clear that that is the antenna. That's not where I'm saying the handset was.
So the handset is somewhere in that vicinity based on your training experience, is that correct?
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if we could have the next slide. And sir, what time period are we looking at in this particular representation?
12:35 to 12:37 a.m.
And again, if you could, using the laser pointer before you, direct the jury's attention to what, if anything, of significance or relevance you depicted in this representation.
So those same icons appear as about the locations relative to this investigation. You'll see another red triangle here close to Route 95, which is NEB ID 57286. And during this time period, the handset associated with this account communicates with that antenna.
And from the locations of significance or relevance as far as ENB ID 57286, which of them is it closest to in this depiction?
It's just north of 34 Fairview Road.
And now if I could direct your attention to the next, Ms. Gilman, if I could have the next slide. And Lieutenant, what time frame are we looking at in this slide?
This comes from one call that occurred at 12:38 a.m.
And if you could, again, using the laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to what, if any, other locations you identified or signified in this representation.
Again, same icons further south at the bottom. The antenna is located here at the intersection of Route 93 and 138, and it's ENB ID 57021.
And of those locations of interest that you signified within this slide, where is ENB ID 57021 in relation to those?
If you think back to the previous slide, so now we've moved a little bit further east. Here's Fairview Road, and here is 1 Meadows Ave.
And if I could direct your attention to the next slide, and if I could have the next slide on the screen, please. And Lieutenant, what time frame are we looking at in this slide?
12:39 a.m. to 5:08 a.m.
And again, if you could, using the laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to what, if any, locations of significance you note in this slide.
So there were a series of calls during this time period. They all used this antenna here, ENB ID 57199, which is south of Meadows Ave.
I could direct your attention to the next one. If I could have that one, please. And Lieutenant Tully, what are we looking at as far as time frame in this particular slide?
There was one entry in the call detail records at 5:16.
And again, using the laser pointer, if you could direct the jury's attention to what, if any, locations you've denoted within this particular slide.
I'll start with the antenna that was used, which was 57259 here in downtown Canton, just north of the Waterfall Bar and Grill.
If I could direct your attention to the next slide, sir. Please come on, if I could. Lieutenant, what time frame is depicted in this slide?
5:19 a.m.
And again, if you could, using the laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to where the antenna is that the defendant's phone is connected to at this point, and what, if anything, it is closest to.
Slightly further south than the previous one, it's 57199, directly south of 1 Meadows Ave.
Now, if I could ask you to turn to the next slide, Mr. Nguyen, if I could have that one. And Lieutenant, what time frame are we looking at in this?
5:20 a.m. to 5:37 a.m.
And again, if you could, using the laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to where the antenna is and what, if any, of the locations you observe it, where it is in reference to those.
I previously mentioned this one here at the intersection of Route 93 and 138. It's ID 57021. It's north of those locations I had mentioned earlier, the 34 Fairview and 1 Meadows Ave.
And next slide. What time frame are we looking at in this, sir?
It's one entry at 6 a.m. from the record.
And if you could, again, using the laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to the antenna and where it is in relation to locations of interest in this slide.
It is located just north of the Waterfall Bar and Grill in downtown Canton.
What time frame are we looking at in this slide, sir?
6:03 to 6:57 a.m.
And again, using the laser pointer, if you could, direct the jury's attention to which antenna the defendant's cell phone is connected to at this point and where it is in relation to locations of significance or relevance throughout the course of this investigation.
During this time period, the cell phone will bounce back and forth between two antennas. So I did lump them together and place them on one map with this time frame here. So you will see two antennas. One is this one here, just west of Route 95, which is 57171. The other antenna is north of 34 Fairview, which is 57286.
Now, sir, as far as the locations that you observed from looking at the CSLI information from the defendant's phone, if any relationship did you note with them in relation to what you had observed on each of the respective videos from the Canton Public Library and the Temple Beth Avery?
It's consistent. As with anything in our investigation, we want to get corroborating information. So the best corroboration about the location of a handset is to obtain video, receipts, anything else with a timestamp and a location that we can corroborate the location of a handset.
And with respect to information that you had received as far as the defendant's whereabouts, what, if any, consistency or corroboration was there between witness accounts of the defendant, including the defendant's own statements, as far as where she was and what you retrieved from the CSLI?
Objection.
Ask it differently, Mr. Valley.
Throughout the course of the investigation, were you made aware of path of travel attributed to the defendant both between the hours of between the times of 12 a.m. and 6 a.m.?
Yes.
And the information that you obtained from the CSLI records, was that consistent with what you knew as far as the location of the defendant?
Objection.
Ask it differently, Mr. Valley. The objection is sustained.
With respect to what you knew as the path of travel of the defendant, the information that you obtained from the CSLI, what, if any, relationship was there between that and the path of travel you knew of the defendant?
Objection.
I'll allow it.
It's consistent.
Now, sir, as far as the ranging data, what, if anything, were you able to do with the ranging data in relation to a visual depiction of that?
Similar to the maps we just saw using Google Earth, I made a visual representation of what the records display, specifically where the antenna is, but I took that additional step to measure the distance out from the antenna that's depicted in the records and draw a semicircle line depicting where that range would lie.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Pages. Ask you to look at that and if I can push it. And do you recognize those documents, sir?
Yes,
What do you recognize those to be?
the series of maps I created using the ranging or engineering report.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm about to seek to introduce in a minute the next exhibit.
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay.
Now, turning your attention to the second page of what's now been marked as Exhibit 576. Is that what's up on the screen? What you have before you as Exhibit 576, the second page in, is that what's up on the screen, Lieutenant?
Yes,
Now, if you could, again, what time frame are we looking at here?
12:17 a.m.
And again, sir, if you could, using the laser pointer, describe to the jury what's depicted in this particular slide.
So two locations that are, again, as a frame of reference, 34 Fairview Road in Canton and the Waterfall Bar and Grill are depicted with icons. You'll notice a red lollipop would be the best description icon here. And next to it, you see a number and the words either first or last. This one, 3, first or in last. If you were to go back to the record, or the ranging report, you would go to line 3, and that's where you would find this record. So it's just an easy way to cross-reference the map with the document. With these ranging reports, it gives me the range that the handset was from the antenna at the beginning of the communication and at the end of the communication. So that's the first range and the last range. That's why we're using those words. You'll notice a line that goes straight out to the semicircles. That line denotes what's called the azimuth, and I've failed to kind of describe what an azimuth is. So as antennas are placed in these locations, they're pointed in a direction. Now, they're not typically a 360-degree antenna. Some are, but mostly they're not. They're pointed in a direction and have a beam width. Rule of thumb, and as you'll see with the records with Verizon, it says typically it's 120-degree beam width, because they'll place 3 around the circle and you get 360 degrees. So with this record here, I know what the azimuth is. I then draw a semicircle in each direction. I'll go beyond that 120 degrees just to give deference to maybe it was on the outer edges of that. So I want to give the tie to it was maybe further away. So that's what's depicting on the map.
Now, with reference to this the semicircle itself, if I could ask, is the semicircle that is being drawn, what does that exactly denote as to the location of the handset or the cell phone?
The report is telling me that the handset is somewhere on that semicircle. So the phone could be anywhere from here on the semicircle all the way around to there on the semicircle.
So again, it's not denoting sort of that the handset of the phone is within the confines of the semicircle, but actually on the line that you've drawn.
Correct.
Now, with reference to what's up on the screen now, Lieutenant, what time frame are we looking at here?
5:18 a.m.
And again, if you could, using the laser pointer before you, draw the jury's attention, or direct the jury's attention to what, if anything, of significance you observe in this slide.
So the two icons are, again, appear on the map: Waterfall Bar and Grill, 34 Fairview Road. Here is that red lollipop, which is the antenna that's used during the communication. The azimuth, or the direction in which the antenna is facing, is depicted on there, and two semicircles. The first one and the last one. As a frame of reference, I failed to put the Temple Beth Abraham, which would appear right here.
Now, from this, what's depicted in these last two exhibits, as far as what you're able to plot out from the CSLI and the ranging data, what, if anything, what, if any, significance did that have as far as in reference to the investigation and the handset or the defendant's phone?
It's important to figure out the movements of someone that we're investigating for a crime. So these ranging records really narrow down the scope of they're somewhere around this antenna to it's possible they were somewhere on this line. Again, these records are just depicting where the handset was, but as we all know, we all travel with our cell phone within arm reach.
And again, it's in reference to this ranging data in the last two slides here, what, if any, relationship did you find that to have with other information being videos and witness statements that you obtained during the course of the investigation?
So as we previously showed, Temple Beth Abraham, which would be located here, just south of this intersection here, depicts a large black SUV traveling north on Washington Street. That SUV is similar to the defendant's. And with this record here, a phone associated with the defendant was somewhere on this arc at that exact same time.
Thank you, sir. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Good morning, Lieutenant Tully.
Good morning.
I'm not going to go in any particular order, so forgive me if I bounce around just a little bit. You indicated that on direct examination this morning that you didn't seek a search warrant for 34 Fairview, the interior of 34 Fairview, correct?
Yes.
To your knowledge, nobody under your supervision sought such a search warrant either, correct?
Correct.
You explained that in your mind, there was no probable cause to seek a search warrant for the interior of the home, is that right?
Yes.
But you also admitted that you didn't seek consent, for which you don't have to have probable cause if you get consent, correct?
Correct.
You could ask me right now, hey, Alan, can I look at your cell phone? If I say sure, you do your thing, right?
I could.
But for a court to order that I hand over my cell phone, you got to get a search warrant, sign an affidavit, and get a court to agree with it, correct?
Yes.
You've applied for myriad search warrants in your career, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Very experienced, correct?
Supposedly.
And I expect that there have been circumstances, Lieutenant Tully, in which you sought a search warrant and the judge says, no, I don't think there's enough here, correct?
Yes.
You don't get in trouble for that, correct?
With whom? No.
With the court.
No.
Law. It's not illegal.
It's not illegal.
You don't get sanctioned for it. You don't get your pay docked because you don't get a search warrant based on an affidavit, correct?
Correct.
So there's no real sanction in seeking it if you in good faith believe that there's a reason to seek it, correct?
Outside of the time that it takes to author it and put it together and go to the court, yes, there's no sanction.
Of course. But in a homicide investigation, you're not going to fail to do certain investigative tasks because it takes time. You're going to do what is necessary for the investigation, correct?
Yes.
Of course. You indicated that you did not believe that there was information sufficient that y'all had at the very initial stages of the investigation to seek a search warrant or to ask for consent, correct?
Yes.
But you did know the following. In the initial moments of the beginning of the investigation, you were aware that John O'Keefe had been invited to a party inside a home, correct?
Yes.
You knew that that home was located at 34 Fairview.
Yes.
You also knew that John O'Keefe arrived at 34 Fairview, correct?
We believe so, yes.
You also knew at the time that he had been, for want of a better phrase, partying with the individuals who were inside the home, correct? Expected to meet at the house.
They were at a bar previous to that, yes.
You're aware that a drinking glass was found in the yard attendant to or close to, adjacent to where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found.
Yes.
That drinking glass had been broken, correct?
Yes.
You're aware that drinking glasses are commonly found inside homes, right?
As well as bars.
As well as bars, right? But at that point, you didn't know. It's just a broken glass, correct?
It's a broken glass, correct.
You also know that he was found without a coat on.
Yes.
Are coats normally worn outside or inside?
It's user's choice.
Fair enough. 18 degrees, you would expect that if someone was outside, they'd have a coat on, correct?
I'm the kind of person that wears shorts throughout the year. I'll often go without a jacket.
All right. A true Bostonian.
Yes, sir.
He didn't have any coat, gloves, scarf, nothing like that.
Correct.
He had no winter gear on whatsoever, correct?
Correct.
Under ordinary circumstances, and you may be the exception, but under ordinary circumstances, if someone was out in 18-degree weather, you might expect that they would have some winter garb on, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
You certainly would expect that if someone took their coat, their glove, their hat, their winter gear off, they might leave it inside the house, right? Rather than outside the house.
Objection.
I'll let you answer that, Detective Lieutenant.
It's probably predicated on where you take it off.
Right.
And your relationship to the location.
Right. Reasonable assumption might be the winter gear might be inside the house.
Objection.
Is that a reasonable assumption, Detective Lieutenant?
No, Your Honor.
Okay.
It's not reasonable that he would have his jacket inside the house? You wouldn't just assume that?
Well, using the term "the house," you talking about any house? 34 Fairview?
Correct.
No, it's not reasonable.
All right. You didn't think it was reasonable at the time
Still don't.
to even ask? Could he have had a jacket off inside the house? And I'm talking about at the time, the initial stages of the investigation.
Who am I asking this question to?
So I'm asking if you believed it was reasonable if a man is found 30 feet outside the front door of a home and he's got no winter gear on whatsoever, that perhaps he came from inside the home not having donned his winter gear.
Objection.
Can you answer that, Detective Lieutenant?
It's not reasonable, given other information I had.
You also know that he didn't have a shoe on, correct?
Yes.
Where might you look for the shoe if you didn't find it out by his body initially?
Well, the question's not accurate to the facts we had at the time.
Well, the facts you had at the initial stages, I'm talking about just after 6:37, 7:30 in the morning, when the investigation was beginning. During those times, you didn't have any information about where the other shoe was, except he just didn't have a shoe on at the hospital, correct?
We didn't know there was a shoe not accounted for until after noontime.
So when you did find out that there was a shoe unaccounted for, one place to look might be outside, correct?
Yes.
And another place to look might be inside the home, correct?
We looked at the former, and we located it there.
You also are aware that a body is being dragged by the shoulders, could easily lose a shoe.
Objection.
Sustained.
Have you ever experienced a homicide in which a body is dragged and you're aware of a shoe being pulled off while the body's being dragged?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
I don't have experience with that.
Certainly not outside the realm of possibility as a professional investigator.
It's possible.
You were also aware that, at least initially, it appeared from accounts that John O'Keefe may have been involved in a physical altercation, correct?
Possible.
As a matter of fact, that was reported by one of your subordinates, Yuri Buchanan, to the medical examiner's office, right?
As a possibility, yes.
As a possibility. And you're aware that your other subordinate, Trooper Proctor, according to certain information he had gotten from first responders, also believed that a physical altercation was possible, sorry, as well.
It was possible, yes.
Okay. And you also knew that the house would be a normal location to have other individuals who might have been involved in that physical altercation.
Objection.
Can you answer that, Detective Lieutenant?
An altercation could take place anywhere.
Exactly.
And people can often travel from the location of the altercation miles away to another location.
Or they could travel 30 feet outside as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay. In the early morning hours of, well, let's say the hours following your Massachusetts State Police initiation or engagement in this investigation, you became aware of Brian Higgins, correct?
Yes.
That name was bantied about as a potential witness in the investigation, correct?
Yes.
And you're aware that Brian Higgins indicated that he saw a tall, dark-haired man enter the home after he arrived, correct?
I'm not aware of that.
And the reason you're not aware of it, Lieutenant Tully, is because nobody bothered to interview Brian Higgins until February 10th, right?
Objection.
So in that form, then it's sustained. Ask it differently, Mr.
When was
Jackson.
Brian Higgins first interviewed?
February 7th?
7th, 10th?
To-
Yeah, in February, not January 29th, certainly.
Correct.
Although he was known to be inside the house, correct?
Yes.
So had you known that, had you had the information, for instance, that Brian Higgins admitted to having seen a tall, dark-haired man walk in the house, that might have changed the complexion of your investigation at that time.
Objection.
Can you answer that, Detective Lieutenant?
In the off chance that Mr. Higgins presumably had said something like that, I would certainly need more information describing this person. I would ask a series of questions to narrow it down to make sure that this person was John O'Keefe.
Right, exactly. That would just be a normal part of the investigation. You just take evidence A and link it to evidence B to evidence C. That would be the normal way to do an investigation.
We would normally follow the evidence. Correct.
But in point of fact, nobody did seek a warrant to go inside the house, correct?
Correct.
Nobody did seek to have a forensic team go inside the house and look,
Correct.
and nobody asked for consent.
Correct.
I want to ask you about the Sallyport video, if I could. Did you obtain a copy of any video surveillance footage from Canton Police Department?
Yes.
Okay. If you can, tell me which footage you obtained and where. And there's several videos, Lieutenant, and it can be confusing. So if you could be as detailed as possible, explain what footage you gathered and when you gathered it.
Most recently, and the date escapes me, but it's within the last couple of months, I had contacted Chief Helena Rafferty of the Canton Police Department and asked her to burn another copy or create another copy of the Sallyport video during a certain time period on January 29th to ensure that the video that we had received previously was all of the records responsive to that request.
And you found out that the video that you received earlier was not, in fact, completely responsive because there was a video left out, right?
I didn't do a one-to-one comparison. I just had made the request.
Ultimately, you did receive a video of the interior of the Sallyport, correct?
Yes.
And can you tell me, did you look at that? Did you review that video?
Quickly, not the whole thing.
Okay. Was there anything of note about that interior video? By the way, let me ask you another question, Lieutenant Tully, just to clarify. There's a very grainy, dark, almost black of the interior, correct? You've seen that one?
Yes.
Or excerpts of it?
Yes.
And that video is missing some pretty significant time frames throughout the video?
I didn't review the whole thing, but I'm aware of that video existing.
Fair enough. Then there's another video that's pretty clear, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm asking you about the clear video. Did you make any note about anything unusual about that video?
No. But again, I didn't really review it.
You didn't review it with any detail?
Correct.
Did you make a note that that video was inverted?
I did not.
Did you make a note about the timestamp on the video either being correct and properly positioned or inverted?
No.
Did you give that video to Trooper Proctor?
I believe I gave it to Sergeant Buchanan.
Sergeant Buchanan? And then what did Sergeant Buchanan do with it?
Reviewed it?
Okay. Is that somehow uploaded onto the Massachusetts State Police computer system somehow for safekeeping?
No, we'll hold it within the DA's office on that server. You know, it's not touching the MSP.
Okay, so it is uploaded on some sort of server.
We will memorialize it somewhere, yes.
Did Chief Rafferty give it to you on a thumb drive or a disk, or how was it physically provided?
I don't know. I didn't receive it. She dropped it off at the office. I remember a thumb drive.
You remember a thumb drive. All right, and then it's uploaded onto the system, and the case officer would have access to that system.
Yes.
Okay. And in this case, that would be Trooper Proctor.
Yes.
Did you notify Trooper Proctor, when I say immediately, reasonably quickly, after you received, or after you got notice that the video had been dropped off by Chief Rafferty?
I informed Sergeant Buchanan.
Okay, and do you know, as you sit here, you may not, as you sit here, do you know if Sergeant Buchanan reasonably quickly informed Trooper Proctor that that video existed?
I don't know when or where that notification was made.
As you sit here now, you are aware that Trooper Proctor is aware of that video and had access to it?
Yes.
Okay. Yesterday, there was some testimony about taillight pieces that were found at the location, correct?
Yes.
May I have just a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
With the court's permission, I've asked for the evidence bags that were entered into evidence yesterday.
Okay. May take a minute.
Before I get to the evidence bag, may I inquire?
Yes.
Thank you. Before I get to the evidence bag, Lieutenant Tully, one more, or maybe a couple of more questions about the Sallyport video. You indicated that you received additional video from Chief Rafferty that once she dropped it off, you said within a couple of months.
Yeah. Additional that package, yes.
What was the original Sallyport video that you received? In other words, what were you following up on?
What you had previously described as a grainy black-ish video.
Okay, and so just to be clear and close that loop, when did you receive that video, if you can tell us?
Which one? The grainy one?
The grainy one.
Earlier in the investigation.
A year ago, 2 years ago?
I don't recall.
Okay. Do you believe it was pretty early on in the investigation?
I don't recall.
Do you know what the mechanism was that you received that one? If Chief Rafferty is the one that gave over the clear video, how did you get the grainy video?
I don't know.
Was it you that received it, or do you believe that you commissioned Trooper Proctor to go get that video.
Would have been a task for Sergeant Buchanan or Trooper Proctor or someone else from the unit.
So the reason you don't know is because you didn't personally do it.
Correct.
Yesterday, you testified that it is obviously your responsibility as not just the chief of the unit, but as the evidence officer to maintain and protect the integrity of the physical evidence that's found under your supervision, correct?
Yes.
You indicated that you took photographs of the items that were recovered on that initial SERT search, and you took those photographs in place where they were found, correct?
Yes.
With the exception of one of the photos, you indicated that it had been moved by a shovel, and then you instructed the individual put it back down where it was found, and then that's the point at which you photographed it, correct?
Yes.
You took an establishing shot, then a closer shot, and then I think even a third close-up shot, correct?
Yes.
And you indicated pretty clearly yesterday what the evidence that you found at the scene was a red plastic taillight piece that was recovered first, then 3 feet or so to the south of that, the shoe was recovered, and then 1 to 2 feet south of that, another red plastic piece, and then a clear plastic piece next to that, correct?
Yeah, you get the last two inverted. It's clear, then red. But
Inversion, it's becoming a theme. Sorry about that. So it was a clear piece,
So I'm going to strike that comment.
and then a red piece next to the clear piece.
yes.
3 pieces of plastic in total and a shoe.
No, there was with the clear piece. There was 2 pieces with it. So clear plastic, multiple pieces of the clear plastic.
Okay, so yesterday when we saw the photographs that you testified to, there was 1 piece of clear plastic that was photographed, right?
2.
Didn't the photograph have 1 sort of arc-shaped clear piece of plastic that you described as having did you say dimples or stippling?
Yes, I think I said dimples.
Okay. What was the second photo?
The next photo that was displayed was the second piece of clear plastic taillight.
So in fact, that would be 4 pieces of plastic.
Yes.
Okay. But yesterday you testified that you found 3 pieces of plastic, and in your report, you reported that you found 3 pieces of plastic, correct?
I didn't number the piece of plastic, if I recall my report correctly. I said we found clear plastic. And as I displayed out of the bag, there was 2 pieces of clear plastic that we...
But there was only a photograph of 1,
No, there wasn't.
and your report says 3 total pieces of plastic, doesn't it?
No.
Let's take a look.
Do you have your report with you, Detective Lieutenant?
Not that one, Your Honor.
Okay. Jim, can I have those photographs from yesterday?
Your Honor, is it possible that we can take our recess so I don't waste the jurors' time? I can use my time wisely.
Sure.
All right, jurors, we'll take our morning recess.
All rise for the court, please.
Time.
Sure, go right ahead.
Lieutenant Tully, we were talking just before the break about the SERT search on January 29th, 2022. Obviously, it's important to be accurate in terms of the memorialization of things that are found of note during a search, correct?
Yes.
And the way that you normally would memorialize something like that would be in a police report, correct?
That's one method, yes.
You might have personal handwritten notes
I
that
might.
would attend a search, correct?
Yes,
You might videotape part of it or all of it,
I could.
and then you could photo document it as well.
Yes.
But ultimately, the circumstances surrounding how something was found or what was found at the time is best done in a memorialization in a police report, correct?
That is one method,
And
yes.
that is the official record of what was done at the time and who did it, correct?
Yes.
And you did, in fact, draft a police report as it pertains to the search that was done by the SERT team on January 29th, 2022.
Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
If you would take a look at the face page of that and tell me if that looks familiar to you.
It does.
Is that your report that you utilized? Is that the report that you wrote, rather, not utilized? Is that the report that you wrote documenting the search that was conducted that you've testified to in front of this jury?
Yes.
What's the date of that report?
February 10th, 2021, which was a typo, should be February 2022.
Okay, so February 10th, 2022 was the date that you memorialized the information about the search, correct?
Yes.
Obviously, that was much, much closer in time than today, correct?
Yes.
Or yesterday. correct?
Correct?
If you turn to paragraph 3, could you review that paragraph and tell me, after you review it, if that refreshes your recollection about exactly what you indicated was found by you and the SERT team on January 29th, 2022?
My recollection of what was located remains the same. I do see that the report states that it was a piece of clear plastic.
Okay. So, in fact, your report says that at approximately 17:45 hours, which is what time?
5:45 p.m.
The SERT team located, quote, a piece of red plastic, correct?
Yes.
And then it goes on to say it was consistent with brake light material from a motor vehicle, right?
Yes.
Then if you look down a couple of other sentences, you talk about the shoe that was then recovered, correct?
Yes.
Then if you look at the second to the last sentence, a few feet south from the sneaker, a piece of clear plastic consistent with clear lens of a motor vehicle was located, correct?
Yeah, the quote is a second piece of red plastic. Yes.
Well, actually, the sentence before that, sentence just above that, starting with a few feet south.
Yes.
It reads, a few feet south from the sneaker, a piece of clear plastic.
That's not what it says. Would you like me to read it?
Oh, I'm reading it. Sure, read it.
Okay. The sentence is several feet south of the clear plastic.
Lieutenant Tully.
Sorry.
Sentence above that. Before that.
A few feet south of the sneaker, a piece of clear plastic consistent with clear lens of a motor vehicle was located.
Right. So in your lexicon, a piece means singular, does it not?
Yes.
If you meant pieces, you would have written pieces. You're educated, correct?
Allegedly.
So clearly, from this report that was memorialized on February 10th, you indicated that a piece of clear plastic was located consistent with clear lens from a motor vehicle, right?
That's what it says.
Okay. Then, well, it's not just what it says, it's what you wrote.
Correct.
Right. Then the next sentence, which is the sentence you were about to read, go ahead and read that for me as well.
Several feet south of the clear plastic, a second piece of red plastic was located.
Okay. Simple math. According to your report written on February 10th, a piece of red plastic was found first. Then a piece of clear plastic was found. Then a piece of red plastic was found thereafter, correct? According to that report.
Yes.
Then you go on in the following paragraph to reiterate, just to clear up any doubt about what was found. And the last sentence reads, the sneaker and 3 pieces of plastic were secured as evidence, correct?
Objection.
It's the, overruled, I don't know. What's the objection?
Form.
No, I'll allow it.
Is that what it says?
Yes.
Okay. Then yesterday, you were asked to open these 2 evidence envelopes, correct? Yeah, evidence bags.
Should I take a look?
Oh, of course, yes. May I approach you on that?
Yes.
Sorry. 570, 571. Those are the bags that you opened yesterday, correct?
Yes.
You indicated yesterday in front of the jury, you didn't indicate, you pulled out 2 pieces of clear plastic, did you not?
I did.
Okay. That was in bag, I want to say that was in bag 570. Why don't we do this? Can you please open, with the court's permission, can you please open bag 570, I'm sorry, exhibit 570 in that bag, and just look inside.
I didn't bring gloves with me, Your Honor.
I think there might be some on the stand
Oh,
there
thank you, Your
inside
Honor.
that.
Attorney Jackson, could you just repeat your request again, make sure I have it correct?
Of course, Lieutenant. Let's start with 570.
Okay.
I don't remember which one it is, so if you could just open it and look inside and describe for us which items are inside that bag.
So 570, the description is pieces of red hard plastic taillight cover contained inside this bag.
Look down in there and tell me, do you see red plastic pieces?
Yes.
Okay. Yesterday, you pulled out 2 pieces and indicated that was what was contained in the bag, correct?
Correct.
Take another closer look.
As I take a closer look, there are 2 pieces and there is a very small fragment that remains in the bag.
Can you pull that Can you show that to the jury? Okay, you can go ahead and replace that. So in total, Lieutenant Tully, how many pieces of red plastic are in that evidence bag?
As we sit here today, there are 3.
Thank you. Go ahead and close that. And we can open up the second bag. I'll go ahead with the court's permission. May I approach?
Yes,
Thank you. Your Honor, may I?
yes.
If you wouldn't mind, the next bag is Exhibit 571, is that right?
Yes.
Could you please open that and let's go through the same process? Just look inside and tell us what you see.
Inside 571, there are 2 pieces of clear plastic.
You can go ahead and replace those. May I approach? Thank you, Lieutenant. Those 2 bags are supposed to represent what was found by the SERT team on January 29th, 2022, correct?
Yes.
There's 5 pieces of plastic, 3 red, 2 clear, correct?
As we sit here today, yes.
My question, Lieutenant Tully, is where did the other pieces of plastic come from?
Be more specific? Which pieces?
Where did the extra 2 pieces of plastic come from in those evidence bags?
Well, it appears to me that small fragment I pulled out may have potentially come from the larger piece. The
I
other,
think that, just to clear that up, you believe, as you sit here, that that smaller piece was broken off from one of the larger pieces?
again, I'm making a big assumption here at your request.
Okay?
So, yeah, that's what it appears to me by looking in the bag.
And by the way, Lieutenant, this isn't a trick question. I'm not asking you to assume anything. You were there, and you recovered the pieces. And you described recovering 3 items of evidence, correct?
No.
Didn't you just read in your report, I'll read it again, last sentence, the sneaker and 3 pieces of plastic were secured as evidence.
That's 4. That's 4.
Sorry, I said items of evidence, items of plastic. Let's leave the sneaker out of our discussion for the time being.
Okay.
Okay. You were the one that conducted the search, correct?
The SERT team conducted the search. I was present.
You memorialized the search.
Yes.
You were there photographing the things that were covered in the search,
Yes.
and ultimately you were responsible for bagging those items up, correct?
Yes.
There are 5 items in that bag, or in those 2 bags, right? Just the plastic.
Correct.
And yet your report very clearly says there were 3 items of plastic evidence recovered at the scene, correct?
Yes.
So my question, once again, is where did the extra 2 items come from, the pieces of plastic?
Well, as memorialized on the bag, it says pieces of clear plastic. So I'll take the hit that my report does not properly memorialize it. But I would argue that the handwritten notes on the bag that are contemporaneous to the collection of the evidence would be more accurate, as is in my memory of 2 clear plastic things being collected. Now, as to the 3rd piece, again, I'm making an assumption, but it appears that that is a small piece that was separated from the other 2 pieces.
You don't know that that small piece separated from the other 2 by being broken off, do you?
No, I don't.
Just a guess on your part, right?
It's a guess. The bags were, out of our custody at the crime lab for a period of time. They had done an analysis. We did an evidence review with you, yourself, and other defense counsel on December 1st of last year. We pulled all the evidence out. It was memorialized by your investigator, and it was put back in the bags.
You didn't see our investigator snapping pieces off the plastic, right?
He did not.
I want to shift gears for a second, Lieutenant, and talk a little bit about the cell records that you testified to. Specifically the Verizon call records that you testified about. During your training, the 200 plus hours of training that you had, you've learned how to read Verizon records to determine cell towers that are used in your investigation, correct?
Yes.
You were also taught how to read Verizon call records to determine the sector or the side that a cell tower is pinging, for lack of a better word, called a cell face, correct?
Yes.
All right. May I approach? No?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, one of the documents that you rely on pretty heavily is ultimately it's a call record that gives you certain information provided by whoever the carrier is, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, whoever, right?
Yes.
Do you recognize the document that's in front of you or the portion of the call record that's in front of you?
It appears to be a portion from the call detail records we referenced earlier.
Okay. My questions about this are relatively simple. There is a sector number that provides information that describes the directionality, if you will, of the target phone number, which part of the cell tower that target phone number or that target device was facing, correct?
Yes.
In your maps, did you include any of the cell face data about which portion of the cell tower was pinging vis-a-vis the phone that was being tracked?
No. Can I explain why I made that decision?
Please do.
When the trouble with depicting and making exhibits when relative to cell phone records is you don't want to make the map too complicated. So as I describe it to the jury, I want to make sure that the record is clear. Now, I don't typically will use the sector as part of my maps. I would argue that it gives greater deference to the defendant because the phone could be anywhere within a 360-degree area of the antenna opposed to a narrower 120-degree area around that antenna. So for the purposes of making a clear depiction, I typically will not use sector unless it's absolutely important to show that a handset was in a specific location.
And so you did not include the sector information on the maps that you provided, both to Mr. Lally that you showed to the jurors and provided us, correct?
Yes, as relative to the CSLI ones, yes.
So in point of fact, according to the map at least, wherever that little triangle is, that red triangle that you use to denote the cell tower or the antenna, the responsive phone, the device, would be anywhere on a 360-degree azimuth from that antenna, correct?
Yes.
I want to ask you about the one map that was related to 5:20 a.m. to 5:37 a.m. You remember that?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. There were several maps shown. Got a copy. Can I approach?
Yes.
That's a copy of a page of an exhibit that's already been marked and entered into evidence. You recognize that?
Yes.
And that's a copy of your map that you did dealing with ENBID 57021, correct?
Yes.
And the time frame was 5:20 a.m. to 5:37 a.m. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. And by the way, do you know what ENBID stands for?
No, that's why the legend key is helpful. Its node is the NB, but I'm unsure on the E.
Evolved Node B Identifier, right?
Is that a question? Yeah, that's possible, yes.
It is my question. Does
Okay.
that refresh your recollection? That's what it means?
I'd have to look at the key again, but that sounds right.
So an evolved, if that's what it stands for, an evolved Node B identifier, and then a series of numbers after that, is simply sort of the proper name for a particular tower.
Correct.
No two towers have the same ENBID, correct?
Correct.
Okay. With regard to, and I'm just going to call it ID 57021, do you see what appears to be, on your map, what appears to be the cell tower that is associated with that ID number, 57021?
Yes.
Okay. And there's one address that's denoted on your map, correct? That 34 Fairview?
No, there's multiple.
Okay. What are the other addresses that you noted on your map?
One Meadows Ave and Waterfall Bar and Grill.
Okay. May I approach you on that?
Yes.
If I could hand you another map, does that appear to be a Google map?
Yes.
Does that generally track the map that you created, the darker map that you created? Meaning it's the same basic scale?
It is not the same scale.
How much different is that scale?
The one you handed me is a zoomed in version of the map I created.
Okay. Do you recognize it as being a true and accurate reflection of a Google map that's just zoomed in a little bit on the same basic area?
As you just described, it appears to be Google Map
Okay.
creation.
And you see two addresses that are denoted on that Google map?
Yes.
What are those two addresses?
34 Fairview Road and 12 Country Lane.
And as you look at that Google map with both of those, given your experience with both of those addresses, do those appear to be denoted accurately on that Google map?
It does. I would note that you can't see the roads really on this map that you handed me.
Understood. I'm not going to ask you a question
It's
about
kind
the
of it's a white blur, so it,
But does it look like that's where 34 Fairview is and that's where 12 Country Lane is?
yeah.
Okay. Then I'm going to ask you for the third item that's denoted on the map, and that is the cell tower 57021. Do you see that denoted on the map?
Yes.
Does that appear to be generally accurate in terms of the spatial location of where that cell tower is?
Yes.
Move for the admission of that item, that document.
Objection.
Taking a look at that exhibit, would you agree that the cell tower 57021 is significantly closer to what's denoted as 12 Country Lane, the McCabe residence, physically as a crow flies, than it is to 34 Fairview?
I would not characterize it as significant,
How would you characterize it?
that it is closer.
Okay. May I publish, Sean?
Okay.
Take a look at the upper portion, upper right portion of the map that I just highlighted. What does that denote?
The cell tower that we previously mentioned, 57021.
Okay. And then there's a line just a straight line from that cell tower down to this location. What is that location?
It's denoted on this exhibit as 34 Fairview Road.
Okay. And do you see a legend indicating scale? How far that is?
I see numbers and miles written on there.
Does that appear to be reflective of given your understanding and your experience with this location or these locations, does that appear to be a relatively accurate delineation of the distance between the cell tower and that location, and that address?
I don't know the distance between the cell tower and the address off the top of my head.
Would you agree that it's around 2 miles?
It's roughly 2 miles.
Okay. Then I'm going to ask you to take a look at the same proximity, the cell tower at the top of the screen, and then the address at 12 Country Lane. Do you see those two items denoted on the map?
Yes.
And do you see the approximate distance between those two items?
See it on the map?
All right. And does it appear to you that the distance from 12 Country Lane looks like it's less than half the distance to 34 Fairview?
I wouldn't characterize it as it appears to be less than half.
How would you characterize it?
My understanding of that area, I would say it's at least a mile between those two locations as the crow flies.
Okay, meaning between the cell tower and 12 Country Lane,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And it indicates approximately a mile, correct?
It does indicate that.
Okay. And the other location indicates approximately 2.4 miles, right?
It does indicate that.
All right. So would you agree that a mile is less than half of 2.4 miles?
I would agree a mile is less than half than 2.4.
Thank you. We can take that down. You also noted that there were two cell towers much closer to 34. There are two cell towers much closer to 34 Fairview than the 57021, correct?
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, you already noted that for the jurors that say at 6 a.m. or 6:05 a.m. and thereafter, when it's clear that Ms. Reed was at 34 Fairview, she found the body of John O'Keefe, that her phone was relaying to those two towers variously, bouncing back and forth, correct?
Yes.
Those two towers are 57171, correct? Sorry, I don't mean to test your memory like that. I can. There we go. Can I approach?
Yes.
I'm just going to give you that packet, Lieutenant. Like I said, it's not a memory test. If that helps refresh your recollection of the name of the two towers closest to 34 Fairview. Do you have that in mind?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the two towers closest to 34 Fairview are 57171, correct?
Yes.
And 57286, is that right?
Yes.
And both of those towers picked up Miss Reed's signal at 12:33 a.m. and again after 6:03 a.m., correct?
You asked me about 1233, so if it's okay, I'm going to refer back in the exhibit.
Of course.
And that is correct. It hit the 57171.
And then after 6 a.m., it was also picking up, bouncing, I think you said bouncing back and forth between 57171 and 57286.
Yes.
Both of those towers were picking her up.
Yes.
Importantly, though, between 5:20 and 5:37 a.m., neither of those two towers ever picked up her phone or any signal from her phone, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So based on those facts, it's far more likely that Karen Reed was actually at Jennifer McCabe's and on her way to Jennifer McCabe's at and around 5 a.m. than going to 34 Fairview, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
I just want to touch very briefly on the ranging data, the RTT records. What does RTT stand for?
Depends on who you ask from Verizon, either range to tower or round trip time.
Have you ever heard real-time tool?
I have.
Okay, so that's the RTT has several acronyms, but real-time tool is one of them, correct?
Yes.
The RTT data is what you earlier described as a ranging data or access distance, correct?
I didn't use the term access distance. I know that Verizon may, but I said ranging.
So it's just in common vernacular, it's the distance from the tower or from the antenna to where the signal is going, correct?
Yes.
All right. May I approach one more time?
Yes.
Could you please review that and tell me if you recognize what's depicted on that document?
I recognize it to be one of the entries from the RTT report for the account we're talking.
I'm sorry. And it's around 5:18 in the morning, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you utilize this report or portions of this report, including this entry, to come up with your data, especially as it relates to ranging data, correct?
Yes.
Do you see the column on that document called cross duration sex, right? Procedure duration sex.
I do.
What does that mean?
That is the amount of time in which this communication occurred.
Okay. Am I correct in understanding that the length of time for the RTT event is calculated in seconds, correct?
It is.
All right. Do you see the row in the exhibit that indicates the time 5:18 a.m.?
Yes.
And do you see a column that's labeled procedure start time?
Yes.
And right next to it, there's a procedure end time, correct?
Yes.
Are those the start times and the end times that you earlier testified to in front of the jury about the event in question at 5:18 a.m. or thereabouts, the start of the interaction or the communication with the device and the end of the communication with the device?
Yes.
When you say communication with the device, what does that mean? What are you referring to?
It's-
A phone call, a text, something?
We don't know. As I testified to, the ranging reports will create entries even unbeknownst to the user. So I have no information with this record before me about what the user was or was not doing with the phone.
But your testimony is that those two arcs that we saw, those respective arcs that we saw, your testimony is that this RTT data, in your view, establishes that she was on the device, not she, but the device was on the first arc at the start time, and it was on the second arc at the end time.
I'm going off the ranging that they give me.
And then you created those two arcs. I'm just trying to make sure I understand what the definition of those two arcs are in your map.
The definition comes from the first distance and last distance, which is denoted on this exhibit you have in front of me here.
Okay, and the first distance is what?
0.82 miles.
Okay, and the second distance is, from memory, I think it's 0.97?
Correct.
All right. That's a difference of what? We do the math.
1.5 miles.
0.15 miles, correct?
Excuse me, yes.
Okay. And do you see the procedural duration column indicated on that document?
I do.
Okay. And the procedure duration column indicates 0, doesn't it?
Yes.
However, if we look very closely at the start time and the end time, they're not actually the same times, are they?
Correct.
There's a difference in those two times. Can you tell the jurors what that difference is?
It is 4 thousandths of a second.
0.004 seconds, correct?
Yes.
And you testified that you believe that the start and end distances for the RTT event in question indicate two different locations for that device. In other words, the start time, it was on the first arc, the end time, it was on the second arc. You don't know where on the arc, but somewhere on those two arcs.
Using the ranging data, I created a map,
I
and
understand.
that's what I did.
Okay, and so the device would have moved from the first arc to the second arc, correct?
Yes.
Right. You're familiar with, obviously, the formula to determine speed using distance and time, correct?
Yes.
All right. Can you calculate for us the speed that the device would have traveled to go from the first arc to the second arc over a distance of 0.15 miles in 4,000ths of a second?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. Let me see if I can help. So speed is calculated as distance divided by time, right?
Yes.
If you divide 0.15 miles by 4,000ths of a second, you come up with 37.5 miles per second. Would you agree?
Objection.
Sustained.
Can you do the calculation in your head?
No, sir.
Do you need a calculator?
I would.
Your Honor, if
I'd like to see counsel at sidebar, please.
Senator Tully, do you happen to have your cell phone with you?
I thought you were going to ask the other question first with your numbers.
I can. Let me ask you, so you don't have to sit there with a cell phone in front of you, let me ask you if you would agree with this, that 0.15 divided by 0.004 is 37.5.
I'd have to write it out. I'm not sure. I'm sorry.
If you had a calculator in front of you, could you do it?
I could.
You don't have your cell phone with you.
I do not.
With the court's permission, I've got mine right here, I can turn it on, or my co-counsel has one.
How about, can you use Madam Court Reporter's cell phone and do that? She's closest.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Court Reporter.
Thank you, Your Honor. If you could divide 0.15 by 0.004, let me know what you come up with.
37.5.
So that would be, given the fact that the distance, as calculated, as indicated on that record, the distance is 0.15 miles over the course of 0.004 seconds, right?
No, I would push back as to when the distance was being created. That's the first distance and last distance.
Correct. What you indicated was the cell phone or the device was on the first arc during the first time, and the start time, and on the second arc at the end time. All I'm asking is some basic math. So you would agree that if the calculation we just did, or you just did, is 0.15 miles divided by 4,000ths of a second, that is 37.5 miles per second, to stay consistent, miles per second, correct?
Well, I don't agree with the premise of the question. So
You don't have to agree with the premise of the question. I'm asking you about the math.
Oh, the math is correct, yes.
The math is correct, right? It's miles per second, correct?
Yes.
Based on that calculation. In order to get to miles per minute, you multiply it by 60, correct?
Yes,
Can you do that for me, please?
Madam Clerk. The question again, sir, I'm sorry?
Yes. Multiplying 37.5 times 60 would give us miles per minute. What is that number?
2,250.
And if we wanted to go to miles per hour, which we're more familiar with, multiply it by 60 again, wouldn't you? And what's that number?
1,035,000. Excuse me, I'm sorry. 135,000.
135,000 miles per hour, correct?
Yes,
So you would agree, if the premise is moving from the arc, the first arc, moving 0.15 miles to the second arc, over the course of 0.004 seconds, the device would have to be traveling 135,000 miles per hour, correct?
in your question, you said 1.5 miles travel. It's 0.15 miles. You corrected me. I'm going to throw it back at you, sir.
Fair enough, fair enough.
All right.
Okay. 0.15 miles over the course of 0.004 seconds, the device would have to be traveling 135,000 miles per hour. It's basic math, correct?
While I agree with that, I would push back. That's probably not what the record is indicating.
You would agree that that is physically impossible, correct?
For a cell phone, yes.
Right. And you would also agree that since that's impossible, you're not suggesting to this jury that the device moved from arc 1 to arc 2 in 4,000ths of a second. That can't be what you're suggesting.
I'm not suggesting that.
Okay. In fact, what actually makes more sense is that the signal was moving to and from the device at light speed, 186,000 miles per second.
It does. Radio
Radio waves move at what?
speed of light.
Speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, right?
Yes.
Okay. If, as you indicated on direct examination, if that return signal, the bounce, is in any way refracted, meaning it takes a deviation, and it's not straight because of something like, I don't know, weather, precipitation, or snow, then it would take longer to get back to the antenna, correct?
That's fair.
And that could be what's reflected in that map and the distance of the two arcs. Isn't that correct?
That's not my experience with these records.
But you do agree that, in fact, the device, as you indicated earlier, moved from arc 1 to arc 2 from the start time to the end time. That's impossible.
No, I'm saying that the records reflect that the first time the distance was created, marked, and the second time the distance was marked. That's what's represented on the map.
Right, but you said that those are reflective of the start time and the end time, which is 0.004 of a second apart.
No, I don't know that's when these distances were created. It doesn't say start of procedure distance. It says first distance, last distance.
Actually, it says, procedure start time, 5:18 and 19 seconds, 0.154, right?
Yes.
Procedure end time, 5:18, 19 seconds, 0.158, right?
Yes.
That's the difference. May I approach one more time?
Yes.
That's the difference, and that's the 0.004 of a second difference, correct?
Yes.
And on direct examination, you said the start time and the end time are how you calculated the two different arcs,
No.
correct?
No.
Are you changing your testimony?
No. The map says first and last, as reflected in the record, first distance and last distance. So one could hold the map and this record next to each other and figure out how I determined those locations depicted on the map. It doesn't say start and end time. It says first and last.
Right. But you said that it was the beginning of the communication and the end of the communication, which are both reflected on that document, Lieutenant. The
Yes.
start time and the end time. I understand what you're saying about the distance. It's 0.15. Nobody's arguing about that. You're saying, you said on direct examination that the distance was a difference between what time the first arc occurred and what time the second arc occurred. And there was a distance between it. And your testimony was the device moved from the first arc to the second arc. You just said it, right?
I'm saying the device moved from the first arc to the second arc, yes.
And it would be impossible to do that in 0.004 of a second, correct?
A cell phone, yes.
You did, one last issue, and I'm gonna deviate from the cell tower stuff. You got information during the course of your investigation that an eyewitness placed a Ford Edge in front of 34 Fairview in the early morning hours of January 29, 2022, correct?
I'm familiar with that.
As the supervising investigator, by the way, you were familiar with the fact that the eyewitness placed that Ford Edge sorry, let's see if I can start that over. The eyewitness indicated that the Ford Edge was placed there sometime between 2:30 in the morning and 3:30 in the morning, correct?
I'm familiar with that.
All right. As the supervising investigator, did you do anything to investigate the circumstances of that Ford Edge being placed in front of 34 Fairview sometime between 2:30 and 3:30 in the morning?
Yes.
What did you do?
Well, we determined the veracity of that statement, and we want to make sure that the person who gave it is consistent and accurate and had a good vantage point of it. I have concerns about...
By the way, were you satisfied with that?
No.
Why not?
Well, the person has given the statement multiple times, and it appears to have changed over those times. It also appears that the person observed this vehicle from a distance, and also the identification of a Ford Edge seemed highly suggestive the way that I had read the account of it. If I had done that as a police officer, this court would throw out that identification.
So, did you find out anybody in the Albert family, for instance, on the Ford Edge?
I don't recall off the top of my head if somebody...
Did you look at automobile registration records?
I did not know.
Did you task anybody else to look at automobile registration records?
I believe Trooper Proctor and Sergeant Mechanic had investigated that.
And do you have any idea what that investigation revealed?
I don't.
Did the Alberts own a Ford Edge?
I don't know as I sit here.
They did own a Ford Edge, didn't they?
Objection.
So the objection is sustained.
but nothing was done further that you're aware of to investigate the circumstances of that Ford Edge being seen and placed in front of 34 Fairview, right where the body was found, between 2:30 and 3:30 in the morning, right?
An investigation into the reliability of that witness was conducted.
So you just decided, and that investigation, quotes, is, I didn't believe him, right?
No.
That's all I have.
Okay, Mr. Lally, anything?
Just briefly.
So as far as that last line of questioning, as far as the witness in the Ford Edge, you mentioned that there were several different stories, correct?
Yes.
Several different versions of the statement.
Yes.
And what were those different versions?
The first was that this person saw a Ford Edge in front of 34 Fairview. The next one that I can recall is that the person stated that they were not on Fairview, but on Cedar Crest, some distance away, looking at this vehicle in a blizzard. The person also self-reported that he was colorblind, and he was operating a larger motor vehicle. The third story was a concern about the time. The third story was, as he arrived, the Canton police had the street blocked off at about 4 a.m., and he places this Ford Edge outside the residence at a time before that. So we know through our investigation that the Canton police didn't arrive till shortly after 6 a.m., so the witnesses' times are off as well.
As far as the what you termed as a highly suggestive ID with the Ford Edge, can you explain what you mean by that?
As I read the report, the investigator had asked the person, first a question. They stated that there was a vehicle in front of 34 Fairview Road. The witness was then brought outside, and the investigator allegedly pointed to a motor vehicle that was in a parking lot, and it said, "Is that it?" And the witness said, "Yes, that's it." And so it's suggestive in the fact that it would be a single photo identification, which, you know, as a police officer, I would not give somebody one thing and be suggestive, "Is this it?" Because as the courts have ruled, that's highly suggestive, and the person's more likely to adopt that description of whatever they're describing, opposed to if you use other methods.
Now, when you were being asked on cross-examination about certain distances from the house at 34 Fairview to the area where you had recovered items, repeatedly you had been asked about a distance of 30 feet, correct?
I did.
From the items that you recovered and the area that was described to you as where Mr. O'Keefe's body was located shortly after 6 a.m., is that 30 feet from the house?
No, where the items were a little further on the edge of the property, so it'd be closer to 40 or 50 feet.
And as far as where Mr. O'Keefe was located with reference to the curb or with reference to the street, how close was that?
From the curb, reports was about 10 feet from the curb.
And so the evidence was a lot closer to the roadway, a lot closer to the curb than it was to the house, correct?
Objection.
Sustained as to form.
As far as what, if anything, did you find significant between the location of the evidence in relation to and Mr. O'Keefe in relation to the roadway versus in relation to the house?
The pieces of evidence were physically on the roadway, on the pavement, or the curb.
Just one question as it applies to the Sally Port video from the Canton Police Department. Are you aware of sort of how those videos were recorded as far as when they stopped, when they started?
Not off the top of my head, no. But the ones we have in possession, no.
As far as, and I'm sorry, let me ask the question probably a little more succinctly, but with reference to, are you familiar at all with the camera system at the Canton Police Station?
Vaguely, yes.
As far as, do you know whether or not it's motion activated?
The Canton IT director stated that it was motion.
So the objection is sustained.
Well, let me ask it with, are you aware that the cameras are motion activated?
Objection.
As to form, it's sustained.
What, if anything, are you aware as to how the cameras record?
Objection.
I'm going to allow it.
Move your approach.
Okay?
You are muted.
Now, Lieutenant, when it came to the Sally Port video, at some point you did review them to some extent?
Yes.
Now, over the course of your review, what, if anything, did you note in reference to the time? Was it sort of one long consistent, or did it jump?
It jumped.
And based on that, what, if any, conclusions did you draw as to how that video recorded?
It appeared to be motion activated. As these jumps occurred, it appeared to be triggered by motion.
Now, with reference to the items that were recovered on January 29th during the SERT team search that you were present for, in addition to your police report, how, if at all, were they memorialized?
On the exterior of the paper bags that they were contained in.
And when was that done? Before or after February 10th, when your report was written?
Objection.
Ask it differently, Mr. Molly.
When was the memorialization on the evidence bags done in relation to when you wrote the report?
Objection.
I'll allow it.
The difference would be the notes on the outside of the bag happened at the time of collection, and then I wrote my report 11 days later.
So, as far as your memory, as you sit here and testify today and yesterday, as far as the items that you took out of the bag, are those the same items that you recovered or were recovered by the SERT team on January 29th?
Yes.
Now, the information from the call detail records that Mr. Jackson presented to you, there was essentially two little columns, correct?
2 rows, yes.
Rows, excuse me. And was that sort of the entirety of what you reviewed as far as the call detail records in relation to generating the slides that were depicted to the jury?
No.
And I'm sorry, may I approach you?
Yes.
May I see the exhibits? I'm sorry.
These are not marked.
The marked ones.
Which one?
Whatever the last one was, Mr. Jackson. Yes, thank you. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Showing you now what's been marked as Exhibit 577 with reference to what Mr. Jackson had given you earlier. Lieutenant, from what's depicted on there, what, if any, issue do you have with the depiction on that exhibit?
Like I mentioned, it's difficult to get a good sense of what we're looking at because the roads don't really appear on here. If they do, they're light and faint. There are the large black line kind of intersects with a lot of them, with the words of them. At the bottom, it looks like it's written map scale next to a scale, but I can't attest to the veracity of that. Those would be a couple problems I see.
Now, with reference to the slides that you created with the different time frames, not just the one single time frame. Again, the times that you observed, or the location of the handset or the cell phone of the defendants that you observed from the call detail records, were they consistent with other pieces of evidence that you had, whether it be video and or witness statements?
Yes.
And that would be consistent with the location of the defendant, correct?
Yes.
Now, you were asked some questions about speed and distance traveled. And you indicated that you did not agree with the premise of Mr. Jackson's question, correct?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury what it was about the premise or what it was that you did not agree with?
So while I agree it would be impossible for the phone to travel at that distance, I disagree with the premise that the procedure that was being captured here and the distances may not be at the same time. So there may be the distance could have preceded the procedure, and the end distance could have been after the procedure. There are other ways to capture that information. Again, all I'm doing, and I'm at the mercy of the records, is illustrating them. I then take the next step in order to corroborate that information, ideally through video and other location-based information.
Now, in relation to speed, is that something that you've done in other cases with call detail records?
Yes.
And you mentioned that you weren't able to do it here or didn't do it here. Can you explain why not?
By speed, do you mean route of travel or? So if I have a more robust set of records, so again, we're at the mercy of Verizon here. We only got a limited number of records from the ranging data. With other cases, if the phone is much more chatty with the antenna, if there's more lines of communication, I've seen lines of communication as frequent as every couple of seconds or less than a couple seconds. As I map those out, I can make more of a determination of maybe the route of travel of the cell phone. So as I put the first arc, I'll then place the second arc on a map and say to myself, how could a handset get from the first arc to the second arc? And I'll have a number of possibilities. I will then lay out the third arc. Okay, how could a phone get from the second arc to the third arc, and repeat that process, narrowing down the different possibilities. And oftentimes I'm able to determine the route of travel, send investigators down to that route, and we find corroborating information.
And again, why was it that you weren't able to do that with this information that you received from Verizon in this case?
We received a limited number of entries on this record.
And what, if any, relationship does that have to sort of the area or the geographic location as far as the town of Canton is concerned and the number of antennas they have?
Well, as respective to the number of records, it's a larger area the cell phone could potentially be.
So in no way in your testimony, in your slides or anything else, are you suggesting that the device or the handset or the defendant's cell phone was traveling at that speed, correct?
Correct.
So could you explain to the jury again exactly what those arcs mean and what you are explaining with reference to those?
Those records have a start distance and an end distance. I take those distances, place them on a map, starting where the antenna, there's also in that record, states it is. Draw a distance from that antenna, draw an arc at that distance with the radius being the distance that's on the record, and have an arc that's in excess of 120 degrees.
You also asked some questions about weather causing some sort of interference or something in relation to the recording with regard to antennas or which antenna a device might connect to. You indicated that was not your experience with these types of records. Can you expound upon that?
The greatest predictor of what antenna a cell phone is going to use is distance, because like I said, the farther the handset is away from an antenna, the more degraded the signal is going to get. So that's the best predictor. But like I mentioned earlier, there are things that can disrupt a cell phone signal, which would cause a handset not to connect to the closest antenna. And that can be physical obstruction, precipitation, elevation, an antenna goes down for whatever period or for whatever reason, causing it to connect to another antenna that is technically further away.
And so from your review of the call detail records and from your mapping from those various time frames contained within the slides or presented to the jury, what, if anything, can you say from that material in reference to the other evidence collected as to the location of the defendant's cell phone during those relevant time periods?
Well, relevant, I'll zero in at 518. I would suggest that the defendant, her vehicle, and the cell phone were on Washington Street outside of Temple Beth Abraham at that time. That's one thing that I would be comfortable suggesting.
Can I have a moment, Trump?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Jackson?
Very briefly, Lieutenant Tully, do you still have, I think it was 578, exhibit 578 in front of you?
I have 577.
Is,
578 is not marked yet.
oh, it's not? Where's the RTT record? Is that 577?
I have RTT records that are not marked in front of me.
May I approach?
Yes.
Move to admit.
Slow.
Objection.
Right. So let's mark it for identification, Milton.
I'm sorry, and that was letters.
Triple K.
Thank you. You're looking at triple Q, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. When you created the arcs on your map, you also put on the map 5:18 a.m., correct?
Yes,
Where'd you get that number?
from the procedure start and end time.
So you did use the procedure start time and end time, correct?
To denote the time, but not, yeah, to denote the time on the slide, yes.
Time of the event, correct?
Yes,
All right, so the 5:18-19, I'm sorry, 5:18 and 19 seconds, and then, I don't have it in front of me, but .154, I think? Is that right?
yes,
That was the time that you used to establish that the device was on the first arc, correct?
No, I didn't use it to establish the arc. I used the distance to establish the arc, and I placed the time on the slide.
What time, Lieutenant Tully?
5:18.
The time that Verizon gave you as the start time, correct?
Yeah, they're both 5:18.
So there's a start time and a start distance from the tower. In other words, the event took place at this distance at this time starting, correct?
No, you're using the wrong words. It says first distance.
I'm not using the wrong words.
Yes, sir. You said start distance. It's first distance.
Okay, fine. Okay, pick the words. First distance. Start time and first distance, correct?
Yes,
Then
those are on the record.
Right. Then Verizon gives you an end time, correct?
Yes,
And last distance, correct? Yes. And you created your arc based on the start time and first distance versus the end time and last distance, correct?
no. The time weren't associated.
If you're saying no is because that would require the device to travel at 135,000 miles an hour.
Objection. If the witness could please answer the question.
So let him finish.
Okay, sure.
And then the objection to that is sustained. You can ask it differently.
Go ahead.
The times were not part of the depiction of the range. While I will suggest to you that it is probably unbelievable that those are actually start and end times. What I'm saying is we don't know for certainty that that is the exact time, the first distance and the last distance. I'd have to look back at the records, but I also say that we have corroborating evidence to say that that is accurate.
So you'd have to look back at the records, correct?
Yes,
That is your record.
No,
That's
the-
what you looked at, isn't it?
the record's key.
Where's the record's key?
They were provided by Verizon.
Where are they, sir?
I don't have them in front of me.
Right. That's all.
Okay,
May we approach this briefly?
okay. Don't leave yet, Detective.